Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this meeting of the Haltom City Council. The date is September 27th, 2004. We welcome all of you who are here in the audience tonight, as well as those who are watching on either the live broadcast or delayed broadcast of HCTV. We begin our meeting tonight with an invocation and pledge of allegiance led by Councilmember Diane Bransom. If you would stand as we pray.
Let us pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for all we've been given, for families and friends, and for the great country which allows us so many freedoms. Please watch over the servicemen and women at home and abroad and keep them in your care. Help us as we go forth this evening to bring our hearts together and have the wisdom to know and do what is right. Please help us maintain our focus and achieve our common goals while remembering the citizens of this great city we serve. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I want to begin tonight by clarifying something regarding the ability of citizens to address the council. If you are here to address the item regarding the stormwater utility system, that is a public hearing, and you do not need to fill out one of the yellow speaker's cards. If you filled one out, that's fine. We will honor those, but there's no need to. The other items, item 12 and 13, is also public hearings, and you do not need to fill out a speaker's request card. If you wish to speak in the Visitor Citizens Forum, you need to get that in. If you need to get your speaker's request card in. 6 minutes is allowed for those who fill those out before the meeting starts. Now that the meeting has started, the time will be limited to 3 minutes for anyone who fills out a speaker's request card after the meeting has started. Having said that, we move now to the announcements, and Mr. Muir, I believe you have some announcements you wish to make.
I'll call Fran Burns up to share with you a couple of things.
Hello. I just have a few things I want to talk to you guys about. And the first thing is I wanted to thank everybody who helped with the trash bash, which took place on September 18th at the Birdville Environmental Study Center, which is across the street from Haltom High. And our volunteers in Haltom City cleaned up Buffalo Ridge Park, and I'm pleased to say we didn't really find that much stuff. I know Diane helped, and thank you very much for coming out. And the other cities that participated included Watauga, North Richland Hills, and Richland Hills. And amongst all the volunteers, we picked up over 420 bags of trash. And then 300 people approximately stayed for the Water Fest, which followed, which was a day of environmental education and protecting the water. And I wanted to especially thank Mayor Pro Tem Jim Sutton for participating in the Mayor's Litter Fishing Challenge. And he competed against a council member from North Richland Hills and the mayors from Watauga and Richland Hills, and he won the event. So we're very grateful that you took the time to be with us that day. So thanks, everybody, for your help. I wanted to tell you, too, that the good, the bad, and the guilty will be at the library on October the 15th for Murder Mystery Night, and everyone's invited to come to that at 6:30. That's at the library. And the Paw Pals, they're a benefit association for the animal shelter, is having a garage sale on Saturday, October the 17th from 7 a.m. until 4. And anybody that would like to help or donate items should call the animal shelter at 759-2124 or contact Elaine Moore at 235-3073. The last thing I want to talk about is there's a free landfill day coming up during October at the C&D landfill on Saturday, October 23rd. Residents can visit the landfill and drop off for free a truckload of materials. I'm not sure of the hours yet, but I will have that posted on the website. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Burns. And Mr. Muir, I believe you have an announcement or two.
Actually, she took my thunder, so no. That's quite all right. It's quite all right.
We move then to the reports, and we have two. First, the monthly financial report for August 2004, and then after that's completed, the capital improvement status project. So if we can, our finance director, Joel Welch, tell us about August 2004.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, council members. Enclosed in your agenda packet is the fiscal report for the 11 months of fiscal year 2004, the period ending August 31st. As is customary these days, there is an executive summary on pages 1 through 4 that provides some detail. I would mention that there is a typo on the first page. I wish there wasn't, but there is a typo that says that sales tax collections are 13% ahead of last year. They are actually only 5% ahead of last year, but that is, all things considered, is still a very, very positive development for the local economy. The Economic Development Director has, on a number of occasions, indicated that overall business growth in Haltom City has been, as best as he could tell, sufficient to overcome the effects of Winn-Dixie and Kmart, and our sales tax collection numbers are beginning to reflect his viewpoint. So things are better in the sales tax area. Property taxes have exceeded the budget. That's another good sign. The revised budget in the general fund and in the other funds does not reflect the effect of the budget amendment that is on the agenda for its second reading tonight. That information will be built into the September report. So at September year-end, you will see the year-to-date expenses matched exactly to the budget that you have adopted and amended. Let's see. In the general fund, we're having a better than expected year. As I said, the revenues have been stronger. Of course, sales tax and property taxes being the primary revenues. And so we're having a better year in terms of revenues. Even through the end of August, the revenues still exceed expenditures year to date by about $1 million. Of course, most of the revenues for the year have been realized, and we will spend into that excess to finish the year, but I don't see us spending all of the excess, so I do anticipate at this point that when I come to visit with you about the year-end, or the preliminary year-end next month, I'll be able to report to you in addition to the fund balance, pretty much as we had planned. In the water and sewer fund, I am anticipating at this point that water revenues will meet the budget, but that our wastewater and sewer surcharge budgets will be about 90%, 91% of what we had originally anticipated. The biggest, or the issue that we're going to have to address is the fact that Fort Worth Water had gone up on the sewer surcharge numbers for this fiscal year, and that charge had not been passed on. And so we're not quite going to reach where we are needing to get in that area. And when we come back with the pass-through charges that Fort Worth Water has already adopted, I'll be addressing that catch-up on that item as well. We still expect that the fund will come in pretty much in a break-even position because we have put the brakes on all discretionary spending, and we have found some ways to take care of some obligations to the street reconstruction fund that don't involve operating resources. So the fund will come in a pretty close to break-even status, even when you factor in the IESI expenses that I know we discussed in just a little while. In the street reconstruction fund, I know I mentioned this in the workshop, but just as a housekeeping matter, that non-specified revenue and there is a reimbursement from TxDOT for the Carson Street project. In the investment report begins on page 16. Our portfolio has dipped below $15 million. That is not unusual this time of year as we draw down resources. Again, as the tax dollars begin to come in, once the bills go out, the resources will begin to go up. And of course, the portfolio will increase by about $8.6 million in the next report that you receive, because we closed on the bond sale on September 21st. And those proceeds are not reflected in the August report. You'll notice our weighted average yield has been climbing steadily. It's back to an area where I'm not quite so ashamed to admit what it is now. The biggest reason for that increase, of course, is that our pools, the yields on our pools, which were hovering about 1.0% at the beginning of this fiscal year, are now up about 1.6%. And we've also instituted a practice of investing our resources on a plan that will allow us to maintain adequate liquidity and improve our yields by making scheduled purchases on a monthly basis, where we will have maturities each month and purchases each month, but we'll always have cash on hand to make our current obligations. But it'll result in us having a better yield on the portfolio without risking any funds. Any questions?
I believe there are no questions, Mr. Welch. Thank you. Mr. Muir, any comments from you on this item? Okay, I'm ready for a motion regarding approval of the financials for 2004, the month of August. Councilmember Branson.
Thank you, Mayor. I move that we accept the financial report as presented with the correction on page 1 for the sales tax.
Councilmember Lanford.
Just for a second.
Have a motion, a second. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, there being none, if you'll register your vote, I'll display it at this time. And that is a unanimous vote in favor of approval. Item number 2, capital improvement status report. Our city manager, Tom Muir.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor and council, as usual, we'll start with the streets. The Mona Street project going from Katrine to Haltom is substantially complete. The contractor is currently doing some punch list items. The project was completed a little late, but well under budget. The same can be held for Gage Street. That is also substantially complete and under budget. Garland Street, that just recently started last month. The water and sewer mains are being completed. Storm drains is currently ongoing with the completion date scheduled for late January of '05. I know on Georgian Drive, a lot of the residents are kind of wondering what's going on there. We've been there for a while. We're replacing all the infrastructure in the streets on Georgian and Georgian Court. It's taking a while because it's city crews that are doing it. So consequently, as they get pulled off to do some other things, this adds to the time. But hopefully we'll be out of there in the next 30 to 45 days. On the overlay project, most of the streets have been complete. There are the contractor's now leveling some manholes, and it's got one street left to do, but otherwise that is moving very well. It should be complete by mid-October. The building projects. On the Public Works, the Municipal Service Center project. Talked to you last month about some air issues that were going on in the administration building. Those have been, I feel that they've been resolved. They've made some modifications, and the humidity buildup has dropped like a rock. It's almost non-existent in there now, so that's good news to hear. As far as Phase 2, which is the Fleet Services Center, that's been completed. The fuel line is currently operational. It recently became operational, so the staff is using it. The gates are still an issue. We've made some modifications to the gates to make them more usable manually, but we're still going to be putting an electronic gate opener there. As far as Phase 3 of the building, of the project regarding the storage facility, the pad is down, the concrete pad is there. Structural steel frame is up, and the sidewalls are about to be erected. The rec center. Last month we talked about, I briefed y'all on remediating some of the affected areas from the water leaks that was going to be going on, and that has been completed. I do want to have an analysis to make sure that everything has been remediated, and we just got that report Friday, and we're reviewing it now. Some of the roof issues that caused this and have caused so many of the other delays that are there, we've had a leak detection study done to determine exactly where some of these leaks are. We've ascertained that. We got the report again this past Friday. We're reviewing it with the contractor and the sub. Progress, at least in these areas, while visible to the citizens and the consumers out there, we are making progress because we're dealing with the subs, the consultants, attorneys, insurance companies. It's a mind-boggling thing. The other issue that we're dealing with out there is the electrical generator, and where the significant design of that, what the generator will be able to do. And we met with the electrical engineers to discuss that, and they're addressing some of those needs. And again, that report was again given to us Friday. We're reviewing it as we speak now, but that's where we currently sit with the rec center. I'm still hopeful that this thing might get finished by November, but don't hold me to it. Who knows what else is going to happen with this thing, but we are working very hard to get this thing finished and get it moved on to something else. With that, I'll take any questions that you have.
Councilmember Sutton.
Thank you, Mayor. Hey, Tom, with the Georgianne project there, do we, just two questions, do we, as the city, ever contract work like that out on that size of a construction project?
Certainly.
Is there a reason why we didn't do it on this particular one?
I'm sure there is, and I'm
Okay.
not sure what that is right now, but I'm sure there is.
Okay. I'm just, because that is a section of town, I'm just wondering if that can get expedited somehow. I'm not sure if that's possible at this point.
Well, I don't know if trying to bring a contractor in now to complete it is going to be prudent. That's finding a contractor to come in and do the work and provide any type of bonding or warranty for whatever work they do, since we've done so much of it, is probably not in the city's best interest. Normally, when we've done things like this before, we haven't had issues that have been taking us away from it. Usually, we've been able to at least commit the crews to the project a little bit better. Not all the time, mind you, but I mean, we've been able to do a better job of it than we have with this one. They've been yanked around, and God bless them. They'll do pretty much whatever we ask of them, and I appreciate that. But I'm sure they'd like to be just given a task and put on the job and just left alone. And then they could really knock it out pretty quick.
Sounds like we're spreading our staff well and using them efficiently. We're in the areas of greatest need then.
They're doing everything they can.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you.
Any further comments or questions for Mr. Muir? Okay, there being none, we'll move forward. We don't need an action item. We don't need to take any action on item number 2. I want to say a couple of things at this point. First of all, as the meeting unfolds this evening, when we get down to item number 14, and that is the municipal stormwater utility system, we will call for a recess for a period of time. That will let us get up and stretch a little bit, but it will also allow the presenters to get their PowerPoint all set up and ready to go. So just be aware of that. Also, I want to remind all of us of council chamber etiquette. We have posted back here on the sign, coming in no food or drinks, and please remove hats and caps when you enter the council chamber, and we do appreciate everybody's voluntary adherence to that. We move now to the consent agenda. The consent agenda is considered to be self-explanatory and will be enacted by the council with one motion. There will be no separate discussion on these items unless they are removed from the consent agenda upon the request of a council member or a citizen so requests. We have items 5 and 8 and 10 and 11 that will be removed for individual action. Item number 5 and 11 were requested to be removed by different citizens, and with that, we are ready on items 3, 4, 6, 7, and 9. And if I could, Councilmember Sutton, your light was on first.
Sure, thank you. I move that we approve items 3, 4, 6, 7, and 9 on the consent agenda.
Okay, and Councilmember Bransom, I believe your light was on next. We have a motion, a second, to approve consent on 3, 4, 6, 7, and 9. If you will, register your vote. And that passes by unanimous vote. Item number 5. Mr. Muir, you want to introduce item number 5?
I'm going to let Mr. Pliska address item number 5, please.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council, citizens of Haltom City. Item number 5 is the second reading of the amendment to the city's subdivision ordinance. And as discussed in the last meeting, this amendment to the ordinance will allow a property owner who owns a portion of a previously platted lot, will allow that property owner to replat that property out without having the other property owners to participate in this. As we discussed in the last meeting, this is a cost-saving measure for that participant, as well as a time-saving mechanism for this procedure as well. This amendment does not affect the integrity of the city's subdivision ordinance. All the development requirements for replatting are in place. I still would have been able to have replatted any lot within the city if I followed the replatting process. However, if that portion was sold off by meets and bounds in the past and I didn't have the cooperation of the other property owner, I wouldn't be allowed to plat that piece. But with this ordinance amendment, it allows that person who owns that portion, again, of a previously platted lot, to do so following the city's replat requirements, still existing in the ordinance.
Okay, members of the council, any questions for Mr. Pliska before we call on the 2 citizens who filled out request cards? Thank you, Mr.
Thank you,
Pliska.
Mayor.
Stay close
I'll
by.
stand by.
There may be, Councilmember Sutton, did you have a question?
Yeah, just a clarification, James. What that's saying is that if you have a large lot and you want to subdivide it, that's not changing anything in the subdivision ordinance that we currently have, this addendum.
That is correct. It is not changing the replatting process. At any time, I would have been allowed to have replatted that as long as those lots meet the existing dimensions as spelled out in the city's zoning ordinance and also meet the infrastructure requirements as required by the city's development ordinance.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay, stay close by because we may need your expertise in some of the discussion that will follow. Our first speaker tonight, filling out a request to appear before the City Council on this item, is Mr. Jimmy Grazan. Mr. Grazan, if you'll come to the speaker stand, please. Give us your name and address for the record, and you have 6 minutes.
My name is Jim Grazan, 6208 Little Fossil. I don't wish to speak against this amendment, but as written, it's pretty vague, and as best I can tell, it does open the door for people to put a mother-in-law house behind a house and behind another mother-in-law house and a sister-in-law house. It opens up some things that I don't think in the future there'll be some, I believe some people are going to be saying, did I vote for that? I'm not against what you're trying to do. I think there's other ways of doing it. I think that you could utilize some other facilities within the city to do that and accomplish exactly what is needed here and not open some doors that I think later you're going to wish you hadn't opened. It's just worded a little bit too vague, and I believe that it needs to be studied a little further, maybe tabling it at this time and really doing some study on it might be an idea. As far as the idea, it's a good idea. But I believe your wording leaves a little bit to be desired, and in the future, I believe you'll agree with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grzan. Mr. Pliska, any comments regarding this item and the issues that have been raised?
Yes, sir. Again, the integrity of the ordinance has not been affected by this amendment. It simply allows for a person who may not have the cooperation of that other property owner that owns the portion of the lot that he wishes or she wishes to take out and plat. Now, this replat, again, would have to meet state requirements for platting as well as the city's subdivision ordinance for platting. Platting is a very detailed process in which all lots must have street frontage, for an example. Again, if a person wishes to plat out a piece of property that doesn't meet the minimum requirements of the city's zoning ordinance, they indeed would then have to go to the Zoning Board of Adjustments for a variance or relief on the area requirements for that lot. So we're still not affecting the P&Z or the ZVA process on this. Any sort of platting procedure that we perceive as a problem would be, again, caught during the public hearing process, for a replat, again, is heard by the Planning and Zoning Commission and will also come before this board as well. So indeed, if the city did wish to participate in that and provide a variance clause for that, it, of course, would have been addressed during these two public hearing processes. So I feel comfortable in the fact that this amendment simply allows an individual to come forth and plat their property for redevelopment or development without the necessary permission of someone who owns a portion of that previously platted lot. A good example is a plat that Mr. Hedgecoth is working on at this time, which would require the signature of 7 people involved in the way this parcel was cut up in the past years. And if you'd like for him to comment on it, he is available for such.
Members of the council, yes. Councilmember Lanford.
Well, I guess I want to ask you direct then, is the situation Mr. Grzan was concerned about, where a citizen could just start building add-ons, buildings out in their backyard or side yard, wherever, without regard to the ordinances because of the wording of this particular ordinance. You don't believe that's going to happen?
No, I don't believe so, because the integrity of the ordinance is still in place. They still have to become a legal lot of record in Tarrant County plat records. So they still have to come forward with the platting process. And if any variance to that process needed to be addressed, again, we have a vehicle in which to go through the ZBA or the P&Z and the council. But all of these would be studied during the platting and the development requirements of that ordinance.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any further questions for Mr. Pliska on item number 5? Thank you, Mr. Pliska.
Thank you, Mayor.
Our second speaker, Mr. Ernest Hedgecoth. Mr. Hedgecoth, if you'll give us we've already got your name, but if you'll give us your address for the record, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm Ernest Hedgecoth, Consulting Engineers at 5701C Midway Road here in Haltom City. And I'm just here to support this amendment. And as Mr. Pliska mentioned, I'm working currently on a piece of property that's a 4-acre tract of land. But because of this ordinance, because of the state requirements to have to get this, we have 7 people that we have to get involved in, because this property was platted in 1951, 52 as single-family residence. But since then, it's been sold off. Like my client bought 5 lots and half of the other lot, and then about 10 feet of another piece of property. And what's created the problem is the property to the north of us fronts on Belknap. So when we go through having to plat all of this, we've got to ask this gentleman on Belknap that he's got to dedicate some easements, he's got to dedicate some right-of-way, and we've got to put sidewalks in, or pay the fee along the sidewalk fee along Belknap. And he's not really benefiting. My client owns the 4 acres behind his property. And so if you pass this ordinance where we don't have to plat his property, they can only plat their 4 acres, it'll certainly facilitate that process, and we'll go through all of the water, sewer, and the drainage and stuff like that. But I'm just here to say that this will be greatly simplifying and improving. I've had several clients who just walked away because they know they can't get the surrounding property owners to agree or to come together. So I'm just here to ask you to support this easement, this agreement. And I'm not disagreeing with Mr. Curzan about the wording. I trust Mr. Olson and our attorneys to write all these things properly. So I just wanted to say I think it's a good idea. It'll be definitely help the improvement for the city, make it easier to develop.
Thank you, Mr. Hedgecote. Members of the council, remember this is the second reading. We passed this on first reading at the previous council meeting, so any action taken tonight in the affirmative to approve this becomes reality with the passing of the second reading. So I'm ready at this time for motion regarding item number 5. Councilmember Holcomb.
Yes, Mayor, I move that we accept the reading of ordinance 2004-020-15, which is amending the subdivision ordinance for the city as what was stated and explained by Mr. Pliska.
Okay, we have a motion. Councilmember Hutchison.
As second.
Have a motion, a second. Any discussion on the motion before us? Councilmember Sutton.
Just wanted to ask Wayne a question real quick. I know I've studied this ordinance, and the wording looked fairly clear to me, although it was legalese. But Wayne, have you looked at this ordinance and given it a good review? Okay. Thanks, Wayne. Okay.
Language in the subdivision ordinance. So those are other issues we may need to look at in the future if we've got a problem with that. But as Mr. Pliska pointed out, we do have regulations about lot size, access to public streets, et cetera, that anybody has to comply with in order to replat property.
Okay, so Mr. Grzan's comments then are addressed, and he can be assured that his understanding of this is as you're saying.
I think so.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. If you will, register your vote. And the motion passes by unanimous vote of the council. We move now to item number 8, the ratification of an emergency purchase. Mr. Muir, if you would.
Thank you, Mayor. What this ratification is what I'm asking the council to do is ratify a purchase of some defibrillator monitors. In all my years of municipal experience, I've never had to do this, but they were provided for in the budget, in this coming budget, the tax notes that you recently approved, and it's outlined in the 2004-05 budget, called for purchasing 5 defibrillator monitors to be used by our fire department. I'm going to, if there's questions about the need for the defibrillators or what's causing this, and I'll probably have Chief McIntyre address that here in a minute. But it's a very significant need where where in my opinion, and certainly in Chief McIntyre's opinion, that the public health and safety of our citizens was at risk if we did not get these units in place. Chief McIntyre, can you come up and possibly outline for the council and the citizens what's happened with your existing 8-year-old defibrillator units?
Mayor and council, what we're asking you to do is ratify this purchase of defibrillator monitors. Our old defibrillator monitors are about to have an 8th birthday, and this technology usually is about a 5-year lifespan. So we've taken good care of the products, and we've got good service out of them, but they've outlived their usefulness. Where we found ourselves in an emergent situation is that 3 of the 4 units have expired and have significant problems with significant expense to repair those old units. We did borrow 2 units from MedStar out of their reserve fleet, and as the 3rd unit failed, we borrowed one from Phillips Medical as a test unit, and we're utilizing that in the field right now. So we're still providing the service throughout the city, but with borrowed equipment. MedStar's recently said they need to put their 2 units back in service in their usual department, and so we had an emergent situation of either not providing the service or making an emergency purchase of the Phillips Medical units.
How often do you use these things?
We run just a little over 4 EMS calls per day, and some 34 of our medical protocols require that we utilize a monitor defibrillator in some form or fashion in those calls, either by waveform capnography, pacing, pulse oximetry, and things like that.
So this is a daily
Every day.
use
Every day.
of these things. I can't say that these things can't positively be repaired. The repair parts for these things have not been manufactured in some time. Finding the repair parts is a Herculean task that does not, again, compromises what I feel the public health and safety of our citizens. I don't like not following the competitive bid process. I think we certainly tried our best to adhere to it by at least getting the quotes to go along with the intent of it, but we have a responsibility to our citizens, and that's what we're trying to do. Last week, I authorized the purchase of those things, and that this action is what I'm looking for is the council to ratify the action that I took last week.
Okay, members of the council, you have heard the presentation by the fire chief as well as the city manager. I'm ready for a motion at this time, unless there are additional things either of you need to say at this point. Okay, Councilmember Lanford.
Well, I just want to thank City Manager Tom Muir for going ahead and getting these defibrillators. I want to make it perfectly clear publicly that if there's ever need of applying those things to my chest, when that word clear, I want something to happen. You know, I don't want to be, trying to get that thing started, I want it to work instantly. So I appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Was that in the form of a motion?
I will make a motion. I move that we approve,
Yes,
that was agenda number 8, the purchase of the defibrillators. Yes.
Okay, we have a motion.
Emergency purchase, yes.
And I think Councilmember Clark Light came on next.
Yes, sir. I'd like to have a minute of discussion on this. If you're not familiar with this unit as a citizen in Haltom City, I would recommend you go by the fire department and see how user-friendly this is. It's a miniature computer, and what it tells the paramedics is unbelievable. If we'd have had these 10, 15 years ago, there'd be a lot more people walking the streets today. It is phenomenal what it tells them, where to go, and what to do. And I understand the ones that we're getting are upgradable, and we can use them in the future.
Yes, I think they'll probably have a 5-year life, at least a 5-year life.
Thanks, sir.
Was that in the form of a second?
Yes, sir, that is a second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Councilmember Hutchison and then Councilmember Sutton.
Well, I just wanted to reassure Bill if Chief McGuire would train me on one of those things, I'd be glad to make sure something comes through on that.
Councilmember Sutton.
Yeah, I just real briefly wanted to bring out the aspect that you talked to us in pre-council that these units are Bluetooth adaptable, and can you put that in layman's terms for people?
We think that over the life of these products, we're not quite there with the telemetry and stuff through the Bluetooth, being able to communicate with the hospitals just yet. We anticipate by the time this life of this unit expires, it will be there, and we've been told that these units will be adaptable to Bluetooth, and as well as they meet the new requirements that were mandated to meet in November with waveform capnography and some other things. And so it's a good unit for a good price.
And I guess what that means is that if you're on the way to the hospital, the doctors can be looking at your heart before you get to the hospital, which really means that someone's life could be saved.
Right. The whole essence of that is we hope that we can get a patient into the cath lab in a shorter period of time and give those doctors the in-field information early on, and so they can make decisions, prepare for that patient, and get them in sooner.
Thanks.
Okay, any further discussion? Okay, I want to summarize the discussion a little bit in the motion before us. We have some defibrillators that are lifesavers when somebody's having a heart attack, when they're in cardiac arrest. They can be. By some strange quirk, 5 of them went out at one time. Three of the 5 went out at one time. The replacement parts for older technology, extremely hard to find, or they're just not being made anymore. Hadn't been able to find them. The city manager has emergency powers when there's a public safety issue involved, and that's what he's invoked here, and went ahead about 2 weeks, well, not quite 2 weeks before the budget, the new budget year comes into effect, and purchased them out of that budget that had had been approved for purchase. So this is a win-win situation for everybody. And so with that having been said, if you'll register your vote, I will display it at this time. The motion is to approve, to ratify that vote.
Mayor, if I can make a real quick comment. Appreciate Chief McIntyre bringing this to my attention, at least our attention, to your attention. I know he's worked, he and his staff have worked hard trying to keep these things alive, no pun intended. But you know, working with his staff and working with the purchasing agent, they've done a very, very good job. Jerry, I'm changing the subject totally here, and I think I was remiss in some of the announcements. You've got a fire academy coming up,
Yes.
right?
Yes, we
Can
do.
you tell? I know we've kind of made some announcements again, but it starts next week.
Yes, we still have a few openings in the class, and it begins on October the 7th and goes through January the 20th of 2005. It runs from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. on Thursday nights, and we could certainly take another 4 to 5 candidates in that class.
This is a weekly thing, right?
Yes, every
Okay.
week, every Thursday.
Thank you. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, if you have registered your vote, I'll display it at this time, and that carries by unanimous vote. We move now to item number 10, and I had asked that this item be pulled from the consent agenda. I thought it merited discussion. You remember back on June 1st, we had a storm blow through Haltom City with significant sustained winds that did significant damage to the trees, and we spent a good while and several dollars in brush and debris collection. And what this item before us tonight is to consider action ratifying the authorization of that brush and debris collection and the disposal, and to authorize payment for those services to IESI. I won't make any further statement. Mr. Muir, if you'd like to go into further detail on this, I think it would be helpful to the citizens to know what's been done since that time.
Certainly. Just to kind of cap on to it, I think everybody's painfully aware of the mess that we had after those spring storms. Haltom City was particularly hit hard, more so than a lot of other surrounding communities. Fort Worth was hit awful hard also. Fort Worth still going through the mess and still trying to calculate what their cost is, but it's running into the millions with Fort Worth. I've briefed, as you know, I've briefed you and the citizens several times in the past couple months as far as what was going on with ISI. It took a very long time. As frustrating as it was, nobody really prepares for a storm like that. That was like a hurricane hitting the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, and of course a hurricane never would hit here, but just when you say that, look what happened. The cost, running the trucks, picking up all the brush, staging, delivering the brush to the transfer station over on Menace, storing it there, and then bringing in a tub grinder and running the tub grinder for about 50 hours. For all the trucks and the staff to do this from June up through August, it was $136,203.25. That comes down to about $12 to $13 a house, residence. That's an expensive endeavor to undertake. Again, I feel Haltom City was hit significantly hard with the brush and the trees that we have and the trees that we lost in the damage. But what I'm asking tonight is that you authorize the payment of these things. ISI performed beyond what their contract calls for. The contract only calls for mainly the collection and disposal of common household waste or bound up brush, and obviously this was not bound by any stretch of the imagination. And while it did take them a long, long time to do it, they did finally complete it, and they did it as best as they could, as far as well as equipped as they were. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, obviously this was not a budgeted expense. You want to address
Thank you.
How this is being paid for?
You're right. Thank you for bringing that up. We're paying for this out of the water and sewer fund. We did have, we're not having to move money around, say from fund balance. Because of the particularly wet spring we had, we did not buy nearly as much water from Fort Worth as we anticipated. So we're able to move some money from there, from the water purchases, over to cover this expenditure. So this, we can't cover this in the budget.
Okay, I appreciate your details, explanation. I think while the price of $136,000 is a lot of money, we had a lot of damage, and I'm glad we were able to move forward as quickly as we did and get that done. Fort Worth, as the city manager indicated a moment ago, they're still picking up brush from that storm, and they're going to be for a while. So we do have our community cleaned up in regard to the brush and debris from that June 1st storm. I'm ready now for a motion to approve the ratification of the authorization for that, as well as to authorize the payment. Councilmember Clark?
Thank you, Mayor. I make a motion that we budget the funds for brush and debris collection as written.
Okay, Councilmember Holcomb.
That's for a second.
Have a motion, a second. Any discussion on the motion before us? Okay, there being none, if you will register your vote. And the vote is unanimous. Item number 11 was the request to pull this from the consent was by one of the citizens in the audience tonight. And Mr. Muir, if you will, would you introduce this item, please?
Certainly. Thank you, Mayor. Well, Kent's there. I'll just have our economic development consultant, Kent Flynn, deal with it. Kent?
Thank you. That way we won't be saying the same thing over again twice. Mayor, thank you for the introduction, Tom. The matter before you is really a technical resolution to substitute the EDC as the condemning authority on a condemnation matter that's already been authorized by the city. On April 14th of 2003, the City Council passed a resolution authorizing condemnation of two pieces of property. Shortly thereafter, August 25th of 2003, the council approved issuance of certificates of obligation, sorry, I've been dealing with COs too much, to fund the actual acquisition of this property that's subject to the condemnation. Also in that same year, in September of 2003, the Economic Development Corporation approved a resolution agreeing to use the EDC's 4B sales tax fund to make all principal and interest payments for those COs. The EDC has approved that resolution based on a requirement that the city obtain approval from the EDC for any decisions involving the plans of that property and the ultimate development and use of that property. Given the fact that the EDC is funding the actual acquisition and desires to be involved in the actual planning and decision-making on the use of the property, it was felt that the better designation of the condemnation authority go to the EDC instead of the city. So, as I said previously, the City Council already authorized this condemnation action last year. We're simply substituting the EDC for the city so that they can act in lieu of the city as the condemning authority. The EDC cannot take this role on without City Council's approval, so City Council is acting tonight to consider that.
Questions for Mr. Flynn regarding item number 11? Okay, there being none, thank you, Mr. Flynn. We have no one who'd requested to speak on this item, so we'll move now. I'm ready for a motion regarding the pleasure of the council on item number 11. Councilmember Sutton.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to move that we approve resolution number R-2004-028-01.
Councilmember Bransom.
That's for second.
Councilmember Hutchison.
Second also.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve. Any discussion on the motion? If you will, register your vote. And the display shows unanimous vote in support of item number 11. Moving now to item number 12. This is a public hearing, and I'll open the public hearing in a moment. Right now, our planning director, James Pliska, will make a presentation, and following the council's questions of him, I'll open the public hearing.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council, citizens of Haltom City. Again, tonight, normally plats go on the consent agenda, but tonight it involves residentially zoned properties, so they're in the format of a public hearing. The first we're looking at for the application of Mr. Gary Gardner on behalf of Mr. Rick Reeves for the final plat of Lot 1, Block 1, Reeves Edition. It is being a final plat of Tract 16C1 of the T Acres Survey Abstract 25 in the Duplex Residential Zone District. And this is located on the north side of Baker's Lane and contains approximately .9803 acres of land, and again locally known as 5413 Baker's Lane. The plat was recommended for approval to the City Council by the Planning and Zoning Commission at their meeting of September 14, 2004. Therefore, I formally submit the copy 11 by 17 of this final plat for your approval, and Mr. Gardner is here to answer any questions.
Any questions by the council for Mr. Pliska on this item? Mr. Pliska, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, I will open the public hearing at this time regarding this request for final plat of the property that has just been described. This affords members of the audience to speak either for or against this particular application. So I will ask, first of all, if the applicant wishes to address the council, or do you just want to be available in case the council has questions? Okay, I would assume the applicant will be available in case we have specific questions. Okay, anyone in the audience wishing to speak either for or against the final plat of this property? Okay, there being none, I close the public hearing at this time, and we move now to a motion regarding the final plat. Councilmember Lanford?
Move to approve final plat P015-04.
Councilmember Sutton?
That's for a second, Mayor.
Have a motion and a second to approve the final plat as detailed in item number 12. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, there being no discussion, as we register the vote, that carries by unanimous vote of the council. Item number 13 is a final plat, and Mr. Pliska, you want to introduce that to the council, please.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. Again, this is to conduct a public hearing for the application of the City of Haltom City for the final plat of lots 1 through 3, Block 1 of the Bernice Park Edition, being the final plat of Tract 22A2 of the J. Walker Survey Abstract 1654. And this is in the SF2 Single Family Residential District located along the 5,000 block of Bernice Street, and contains approximately 4.11 acres of land and is locally known as 5,000 Bernice. Most of us know it as a senior center as well. And this is for renovations of the senior center, by the way. The plat was recommended for approval to the City Council by the Planning and Zoning Commission at their meeting of September 14, 2004. Therefore, I formally submit an 11 by 17 reduced copy for your approval.
Members of the council, questions for Mr. Pliska in his explanation of this item? There being none, I open the public hearing at this time to allow members of the audience who might wish to speak either for or against this request for final plat. Do we have anyone in the audience who wishes to speak at this time? Okay, there being none, the public hearing is closed at this time, and we move now for the council to take action regarding this final plat. Councilmember Hutchison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I'd like to move for approval, final plat number P 004.
Councilmember Reese.
That's for a second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second.
Let me clarify
Yes.
something. It's plat number P 020-04. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay, we have the correct numbers on that. We're now ready for you to cast your vote, and I will display it at this time. And that, too, is a unanimous vote of the council. As I mentioned earlier in the meeting, the council will recess at this time for 10 minutes. The time is 8 o'clock. I will wrap the gavel at 10 after 8. We will come back in. That will give the presenters time to set up their PowerPoint, and then we will discuss and have the public hearing on the municipal stormwater utility system.
ready.
Got it?
Yes.
Okay. Let me introduce it.
Okay.
You got it turned on. Ladies and gentlemen, the council is back in session now after a brief recess to allow for the setting up on this PowerPoint presentation. We're ready now to look at item number 14, which is the public hearing and the first reading for establishing a municipal stormwater utility system. And let me just mention how we'll proceed with this. First of all, I'll ask Mr. Muir if he has any comments he wants to make, and he'll introduce the presenters. Once the presenters have finished their presentation, we'll ask for questions from the council on any item that needs to be clarified. Once that is done, I'll open the public hearing, and this will afford members of the audience an opportunity to address the council with their comments about whether or not a water utility or a municipal utility storm system should be enacted in Haltom City or not. Following that, then the council will proceed with whatever it wishes to do regarding that after the input of the council. So we do have a number of people who have filled out speakers cards. It was not necessary to do that. However, it's probably always a good idea to do that. Everybody in the audience who wishes to address the council will have an opportunity to do so. I will call on these individuals first, and then all members of the audience will have an opportunity to express their comments about the establishment of this utility system. So having said that, Mr. Muir?
Thank you, Mayor. As the agenda item calls for, it's a public hearing to talk about establishing a stormwater utility. And we're going to, Mr. Fain, I'll be introducing Mr. Fain in a minute, who then pass it off to our consultant. This is just to, and we're probably going to make reminders several times. This is just talking about setting up the utility. We're not making any decisions tonight regarding fees, although I'm sure the discussion will go off into that, and that's okay, that's fine. But I want the citizens to know that there's not going to be any action, any decisions made on fees tonight. It's just talking about whether to set up the utility or not, just the public hearing, the first reading of the ordinance. With that, let me introduce our Director of Public Works, David Fain. He's going to give some background, then he's going to hand it off to Diane Palmer with Palmer Price Incorporated.
Thank you. Mayor White, members of the council. On July 28th of 2003, the council approved entering into an agreement with the firm of Palmer Price to create, establish, and implement a stormwater utility. The council authorized this agreement to address the many stormwater and drainage issues throughout our city. As you're well aware, tonight we'll be addressing Ordinance 2004-01511 on our first reading. And just to remind you, we also will come back in a couple of weeks with the second reading, and then depending if the council adopts the ordinance, and then after the adoption of the ordinance, then the council will address a establishment of a utility fee. This particular ordinance does several things. It sets forth several types of definitions, establishes and calculates stormwater charges and monthly stormwater utility systems fees, establishes a billing and payment of stormwater fees, provides penalties and remedies for failure to pay the fees, provides for the exemption from and adjustment of the fees, establishes program responsibility in a stormwater system fund, and the establishment of a stormwater utility system. With that, we'll have Ms. Diane Palmer with the firm of Palmer Price come forth and make a presentation and talk about what exactly is a stormwater utility, how would the revenues be spent, and other benefits that would be included in a stormwater utility. With that, I'll pass this on to Ms. Palmer.
Thank you, David. And Mr. Mayor and Council, I apologize for my cranky computer. It's in your packet and on.
Moment, if you will, hold that microphone close. I want to be sure our people in the audience can hear as well as the people who are watching on cable. Thank you.
Okay, this may be a trick for me. what is a stormwater utility? A stormwater utility is set up as an enterprise fund from which the funds will be used to fund stormwater activities. It will be used to solve flooding problems as well as water quality problems, and it will operate very much like a water and sewer utility. How would the money be spent? It would be spent to improve drainage in flood-prone areas. It would improve your existing storm drain system, including creek maintenance, maintenance in ditches, streets, pipes, as well as reconstructing existing storm drain structures that may be 100 years old and collapsing potentially, or going in and retrofitting those systems. You'll be able to construct new drainage systems in new areas of town as well as in existing areas of town that may not have underground storm drain system, for instance. It also will help you fund the mandated TPDES program. That's the Texas Pollution Discharge Elimination System. There's some mandated programs that you are required to fund and required to do. They've taken over the program for the federal government, and it's mandated on each city. It also helps you participate in FEMA's community rating system. We can talk a moment about flood-prone areas in town. As many of you are aware, I'm sure the council is very aware, you have fairly substantial floodplain areas in the city of Haltom City. Big Fossil Creek and Little Fossil Creek kind of split the city into three sections, particularly in the southern part of town, down below the airport freeway, and just above it, along particularly Big Fossil and Little Fossil, where they converge. There's a significant floodplain that is severely affected when it rains, and these funds could be used to help implement new systems there, as well as potentially lower floodplain insurance. You get periodic flooding throughout town. Some examples of that the city has not been able to address is Salona Circle area, the Huddleston Street area, Broadway Avenue, particularly on the east side of town, and Denton Highway. For instance, if you'll look at the pictures that we have, some of the things that can be done with the stormwater utility funding is to go from a creek that looks like it does on the left side of the screen to one that looks on the right, like it does on the right. And in the budgets that were put together and the cost of service that was put together for the stormwater utility, those types of activities, particularly creek maintenance, were going to be done by city staff with new equipment that is going to be purchased with these fees. You also have drainage ditch maintenance. A nice, clean concrete channel can push a lot of water downstream. One that is clogged with grass and siltation and that kind of thing does not. It just basically dams up water. You have a lot of curb and gutter issues in Haltom City. There's tremendous need throughout the city to improve curb and gutter. You have a lot of potholes and ponded areas around the curb and gutter. With the funds from the utility, you won't participate. The funds won't be used to do the street surfacing, but the funds will be used to participate in the drainage portion of a street reconstruction project. You have street maintenance issues. A lot of time, one of the things that happens is you have rainwater ponding in a street, you'll get potholes started, and they just continue as traffic goes over it, they continue to deteriorate. And oftentimes about all you can do now with the funding levels that you have is just do a patch. With the levels of funding that we are looking at with the stormwater utility, potentially you can completely reconstruct the street and solve those problems. Another thing that I wanted you to consider is the FEMA community rating system, and I don't know if you're familiar with this or not, but it's a program that is voluntary. The city can participate in it or not. Because Haltom City does have a lot of large floodplain areas, a lot of people in particularly the southern part of town have to buy flood insurance when they have a mortgage on their property. That flood insurance can oftentimes cost $50 to $100 a month for a residential property. With the programs that have been identified with the stormwater utility, you can aggressively reduce those rates potentially if you can increase your rating under the insurance system. In the non-special areas, which are outside the 100-year floodplain, you may reduce the rates by 5%, but those properties that are in the floodplain can get a reduction of up to 45% if you're aggressive. How do you improve that rating? You do a lot of things that are planned in the program for stormwater utilities. That includes trying to reduce flood losses, make sure that citizens are aware how you can do that, have improved drainage systems across town, facilitate accurate insurance ratings, make sure that you collect the information so that you can actually get a better rating, promote the awareness of flood insurance so that more people participate. You do that through public information programs, you do it through mapping and regulation, you look at damage reduction, how do we improve our regulations as well as our engineering design and reconstruct systems so that you reduce damage, and you make sure that people are prepared for floods. All of these can be funded with utility. One of the things that the council has asked us over, again, is how was the stormwater fee calculated? And what we did was we identified the stormwater management needs over the next 5 years. We looked at both operation and maintenance expenses, we looked at equipment expenses, we looked at construction money expenses for both reconstructing existing projects as well as new projects that might need to be in place, new drainage systems, and then public information programs that are both mandated by the state as well as maybe needed to change your insurance rating. We used the city's comprehensive land use plan, and we used Tarrant County Appraisal District parcel data to determine the number and size of residential and commercial properties. We calculated the runoff potential for each type of property, and we developed a cost of service model that basically modeled the cash that would be needed to fund the programs that were identified over a 5-year period. When we did that, to fund all of the programs that are needed that have either been postponed in the past or have not been funded at this point, even though they may be mandated by the state and at some point the money has to come from somewhere, those programs over the next 5 years is equal to the cost of a residential property needing to pay $1.80 per month, or a standard 1-acre commercial property, say a small mom and pop store, of $72.80 a month. What the staff asked us to do is to come back and look at that complete program and see what kind of funding levels that could be subdivided to, so that we can see what levels of funding might be appropriate. We did that. We came back and did that subdivision of the full cost of the program in terms of a priority of doing improved maintenance first, particularly with city staff, so the cost would be less. Funding currently unfunded drainage projects such as the Big Fossil Creek improvements that aren't completely funded at this point. Funding postponed drainage projects that had been identified for a number of years and have just never, the money's never been there to do the projects. The fees then were set such that the rate per residential square footage is equal to the rate per commercial square footage, so that all citizens across the city are paying an equal rate based on their potential to cause runoff to go into the system. Larger properties, of course, will impact the system more, so they pay a higher fee. And undeveloped properties are not charged a fee. The law clearly states that you have to have a certificate of occupancy or potentially a green tag before you can charge a fee to that property. The rate design was set such that all residential properties across the city would pay a flat rate charge, and that each of the commercial properties would pay an individual fee based on its particular parcel size. For instance, we came in and took the full cost of service, if you will, the $8.80 need for funding to do the programs that were identified, and we looked at how does that break down from the standpoint of the priority of the things that really have to be done first. The direct O&M was first, indirect O&M was second. Public Works maintenance equipment, that's a purchase of some substantial large equipment to be able to do drainage and maintenance work out in the creeks and drainage system. Unfunded prior drainage projects that we know are going to have to be funded, and they've been partially funded at this point, and they'll have to be completely funded in the next few years. What we call Group 1 projects, these are mostly drainage system portions of a street reconstruction project. So it's participating in the drainage, storm drain system, and the street funding, the street reconstruction portion of it would come from the general fund. Group 2 are another set of projects like that. You also have some projects that have already been funded by the general fund. These funds could be used to refund the general fund for those costs. Little Fossil Creek debt service has already been put into the general fund. It could be repaid if you chose to do that, but it actually is at a pretty good interest rate right now. And then Group 3 was another set of projects that have been identified for a long time that have not been funded. And one of the things that someone asked me earlier that we want to make sure you understood was that the flat residential fee that's listed here is each residential property in town would pay that fee. The 1-acre commercial fee is just that. It is the fee that would be for a 1-acre commercial property. If you owned a quarter of an acre commercial property, it'd be a fourth of that $50.82 fee. Or if you owned a 10-acre commercial property, it'd be 10 times that fee. So it's whatever portion of a 1-acre fee or 1 acre property that you have. Here's some comparisons of the average fee in the different cities in the Metroplex and across the state of Texas. There are currently 28 cities in the Metroplex area or the North Texas area that have a stormwater utility. There's several cities. Fort Worth is one. Southlake is another. Some of your other neighbors are in the process of studying the stormwater utility just as you are now, and they plan to go forward to look at and see what the feasibility would be for them adopting a stormwater utility. You'll notice that Watauga's fee is $6 a month. North Richland Hills and Richland Hills both have fees. Keller has a stormwater utility fee. Fort Worth has an environmental fee that they've had for a long time that is used to fund really water quality, environmental issues. It was never set up under the current law that we're looking at, and they have hired someone to look at doing a stormwater utility under Chapter 402 just recently. The average across these cities is $3.47. The commercial stormwater fees vary somewhat across the cities. What we have done in our survey is standardize all the fees for a particular size property. These are the fees for a 85% 1 acre commercial property. The long-term benefits of the utility are that you can improve drainage and safety across the city. The general fund monies that have been budgeted previously for drainage projects can now be shifted to street maintenance projects, and those monies will materialize in terms of seeing substantially improved pothole patching and street maintenance, surface milling and overlay projects, street reconstruction projects. There is a very high potential, particularly in Haltom City compared to other cities, to save across the community on your flood insurance premiums. A 45% decrease in a $100 a month flood insurance premium for people on the south side of town is a very significant benefit. You can also, as you aggressively address some of these drainage issues and reduce flood insurance costs and do a lot of the things that are planned in this program, I think you'll also potentially see community revitalization efforts that I've heard stories that that you've had developers come into town, and because of some of the flooding issues, particularly on the south side, it's been a real challenge for them to think about how could we effectively develop this property, and these types of programs that are planned would help them be able to come in and redevelop. And with that, I'll take questions and hopefully provide some answers.
Members of the council, any questions for Diane regarding the information she's brought forth tonight? I believe they're not from the council at this point.
All right.
Thank you very much. Since this is a public hearing, I will open the public hearing at this time, and this will afford citizens an opportunity to present their comments to the council about whether or not the council should establish a municipal stormwater utility system. And we will begin, even though it was, as I mentioned a moment ago, it was not necessary to fill out one of the cards. For those who have, we'll go ahead and give priority to them. Our first speaker tonight on this subject is Mr. Henry Wright. Mr. Wright, if you'll come forward and if you will give us your name again for the record and give us your address, and you have 6 minutes.
Mr. Mayor, council, and staff, I appreciate the opportunity tonight to give you my opinion on this water sewer, whatever you want to call it, coming up.
If you will, would you
my
give
name
the
is Henry
citizens...
Wright. I live at 5076 San Jacinto, Haltom City.
Thank you, Mr. Wright.
First thing, we need to call this thing what it actually is. It's a tax. Any way we get around it, anything we say, it's a tax. So let's call it a tax. Let's be honest with the people. We're going to tax you for some water improvements. And let's go from there with it. One of the other things is, a lot of our people down here that have small homes, a lot of people that right now that say 40,000 or less, this could be one of the largest tax increases they've ever experienced. Some of the people with the large homes, no, it won't be. If you're down here now, everybody will pay the same, except, as the lady mentioned a minute ago, about the commercial property and so forth. I'm talking about the residential property. If you've got a house down here that's $40,000 and one is $200,000, you can pay the same amount of money. Right? Now, I don't think that the reasons for this tax increase has been presented to the people in a proper way. This presentation was nice. I had not seen it. Had you all seen it? How many people out there know what's going on? I talked to Mr. Muir today. He said, well, it's been on the website. We had copies down here. I don't have a computer. When I retired, I got rid of that thing. I'd say 80% of these people down through here don't have computers. And if they do, am I going to sit there and look all day long and try to find out what Haltom City's doing down there? No. They say this stuff started out about a year ago. And apparently, this was a totally different council it was presented to a year ago. I believe we only had 2 members of the present council that was on the council a year ago. We have people here on this council that's been here, council 3 or 4 months, 5 months. Some of you haven't lived here 3 or 4 years. Do you think you're qualified with just what little you've seen now to make this decision for all the people in Haltom City? I don't think so. I don't think so. I think right now you need to study this more, see what's going on, and don't follow the leader and take the word of a single person. Decide for yourself whether it's good or bad. We go back, and recently you voted a freeze for the senior citizens. Of course, we raised taxes 2 cents, raised your taxes before the freeze went into effect. A lot of the people that we have down here are very low-income people, $400 or $500 a month. This tax will hurt them bad. Now, you go in here with these people that have these small amounts of income, the small houses. The freeze, we're telling people, hey, folks, we're helping you. We're giving you a tax freeze. Vote for me. But then we're telling people, I'm going to raise your taxes over before I give you a freeze. Then we're telling these people, okay, now that we settled that, we're going to freeze your taxes, but we're going to add at least $6 a month to your water bill, which is a tax. What percent is that on your ad valorem taxes on certain houses? Most of the houses, big houses, it would hurt me. It's not going to hurt people like a lot of them in Diamond Oaks. It's going to hurt a lot of people. Here again, this is going to amount to roughly about $70 a year. And we say, so what? We've got people out there right now that's cutting pills in 2 because they can't afford to buy 2. This is going to hurt them. This is going to hurt bad. My next thing, do we need this? I was on council many years ago, and I brought it up many years ago and tried to get money through, which I did not succeed, to do the work then. Yes, I think something needs to be done. I think the program needs to be done. And I'm all for that. But the thing of it is...
Mr. Wright, you're at 5.5 minutes. You have 30 seconds. If you would wrap up, please.
Okay, I'll skip over some of the other stuff I had. It's going to hurt businesses bad. They pay these $50, $100, $200 bills. They're going to go up on prices to cover it. Then we pay double. The thing of it is now, again, people understand, I said in the paper this morning, Mr. Sutton said, if the people are for it, I'll vote for it. If I'm against it, I won't.
Mr. Wright, your time is up. Go ahead and wrap up your
I think
your
this,
thoughts, please.
that the public should be educated, totally. And then this should be put out for a vote for the citizens to decide yes or no, not one or two people. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. Our next speaker is Bob Watkins. Mr. Watkins, if you'll come forward at this time, give us your name and address for the record, and you have 6 minutes.
No, I'm just straightening it out for you. Thank you.
Bob Watkins, 6140 Blue Spruce Circle. I probably need 12 minutes. I've got something to say on both sides. I've been debating with myself on this. There's several issues, but luckily Mr. Wright brought up the ones, a lot of them, that the small businesses are going to have to face. Some of the other people that are in business, the city, through various and sundry boards and ordinances, forces some of us to pour concrete at the drop of a hat. You say, well, you've got this piece of property over here, and you need to have 10 parking places, and you don't have 10 people come in there in a month. So, but everybody wants you to pour all this concrete, and now we're going to come along behind and tax these people for the fact that they've got the concrete. But like Henry says, this is something that should have been done a long time ago, and it's like everything that comes along. We're so far behind that we have to try to double up and catch up. I'm not too sure that this is not quadrupling up and catching up. There's some fee should be charged somewhere for something, and the water bill is probably a good way to do it, but I think that there's a great danger in that for people that have a whole lot of property that either have or somebody's trying to get them to pour concrete on it. One of the things that concerns me while I was investigating into this is I looked into when this was originally brought up. Not originally, I think Mayor Womack brought it up a long time ago. But on Economic Development Board meeting Monday, September the 23rd of 2002, the Economic Development Board loaned the city of Haltom City two sums, one for $310,000 and one for $65,000, and that was 2 years ago. The $310,000 loan was a drainage fund, was to fund the Big Fossil Creek Bank reconstruction project that was completed earlier this year, and a $65,000 loan to the drainage fund for the proposed budget fund to a drainage study of Big Fossil Creek, and a citywide drainage study to establish a storm water utility district. That first payment, regardless of the fact that there's a misprint here on the minutes, it says that the installments are to start this November, and anybody would know that a payment wasn't supposed to start in 6 weeks, but that means that the first payment on this note was due roughly this time last year, November the 1st or 2nd or something of last year. The note was drawn November 1st, 2002. Well, there wasn't any payment made. There wasn't any interest payment made. I went to all the budget meetings. I'm not going to say it wasn't brought up, but I don't remember it being brought up. Since that time, if I'm not incorrect, and Mr. Olson will know, there's been a bill, House Bill 2912 passed to prevent things like this from occurring. At a meeting in August the 26th of this year, the discussion was made, and they're going to redo this loan. And there was an indication that this loan was made with the intentions of this stormwater project fee tax was to repay this loan. That's kind of like, I don't know what you call it other places. I call it betting on the come. You're going to loan somebody $375,000 and say that they're going to use that they're going to pass something out here 2 or 3 years down the road to pay for that. But it didn't get done fast enough, so they missed the first payment. And I highly suspect they're renegotiating, so there's not going to be one made this November either, I don't suspect. Also, quote here, Mr. White indicated his belief that EDC funds should not be used for other things besides economic development. I agree with that 100%. I hate to agree, but I disagree with another statement. Mr. White stated that the city should consider that it has been served notice if the payment is not made as proposed in the next year, that the board should exercise a call the note due. I don't think that a public official should be recommending that a note be called due on the city. But the strange thing is that this note, the money was fixed to be borrowed according to the minutes.
Mr. Watkins, you're at 5 minutes and 30 seconds.
According to the minutes, the money was loaned, and it was an afterthought that the note was signed, that there was a note signed for it at 3%. But so like Mr. Wright says, I believe that although most of you and all of us didn't know anything about this till here recently, I think it's a little premature to jump out and say tonight that this is what needs to be done on the first reading or next time on the second reading. And I don't know whether I'll be put up for a vote or not, but there ought to be a whole lot more input from the citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Watkins. Our next speaker is Mr. Greg Van Nieuwenhuis. Mr. Van Nieuwenhuis, if you'll come forward, you have 6 minutes. If you'll give us your name again for the record as well as your address, please.
Good evening, Mayor, Council, staff. My name is Greg Van Nieuwenhuis. I live at 5208 Blue Circle in Haltom City. I just wanted to give you some background. First of all, my experience with Diane Palmer. Ms. Palmer is very thorough. She's a number cruncher like nobody's business, and I've seen her. She knows the law, I dare say, almost as well as Mr. Olson over there. I've seen the both of them go back and forth on it. So I have no qualms that the numbers that you've seen, the methodology that Ms. Palmer's presented you is accurate. Now let me give you some of more of the background that I was talking about. As I'm sure you're all aware, I was city engineer here for 10 years. In that 10 years, probably the most difficult time I've ever had with meeting with residents was after a rain event. I dreaded them, as I'm sure my staff did and public works staff. Main reason was when you go and you meet with a resident, say they've got a street problem, it's a pothole, you can get it fixed. If you've got a street reconstruction list, you can give them some light at the end of the tunnel, your street's going to be fixed in maybe 3 to 5 years. But when it was drainage, the truth of the matter was I couldn't tell them anything. Haltom City's drainage program, and I'm not sure if it's changed much, and I'm not trying to speak bad on public works, they have employees in the street division that when a drain's clogged, they go out and they unclog it. But when they full-fledged maintenance, for practically the entire 10 years I was here, the drainage maintenance, correct me if I'm wrong, was somewhere between $12,000 to $18,000 a year. For quite a few years, all that consisted of was spraying some type of herbicide in our major creeks that killed everything but Bermuda grass. So there was, I'm sure some of you have seen that. So there was no solid light at the end of the tunnel for these residents. And I don't think that's changed today. The other thing, I think that this drainage utility is a good idea because like I mentioned, and Diane brought up in her presentation, on your street construction, one of the biggest costs besides the concrete on the street is your drainage. Quite honestly, the drainage is a wild card. On some streets, some low volume residential streets, you've got one intersection's higher than the other. You can just do overland drainage, it's not a big deal. But then you have other streets like Gage, Harris, between Belknap and 28th, they're flat on both ends. When that happens, you have to use some serious sized drainage pipe, and that can cost anywhere from $70 to $120 a lineal foot. That is almost the cost of the concrete and the water and sewer just in drainage alone. So it's just quite an expensive endeavor. And it's something that we've neglected. You look at the creeks, you look at the June 1 storm we've had, what that did to our creeks. It's a big expenditure. The last thing that I wanted to bring up, and I was going to say that from my recollection, we've only had 2 emergency projects, but that got spoiled on tonight's agenda. I guess we had 2 emergency expenditures, so I'll have to change that. In my 10 years here, we had 2 major infrastructure repair projects, and both those were to the tune of in excess of $200,000. Oddly enough, and maybe it's not oddly enough, both those projects were drainage projects. One was the repair of the Haltom Road Bridge immediately north of the high school, and I'm not sure how many of you remember when that happened, but when it occurred, there was times where we had that bridge closed. You could not access Haltom High School if you lived where the city manager lives or in KB Homes, Guillen Homes. I'm not sure if you're familiar with those subdivisions. You would have to go around to take Beach Street all the way back to get to the high school. And that was probably for about that specific action for about 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And that, like I said, I want to say that was about $210,000. The other major drainage project was, I think, is the one that Mr. Watkins alluded to. And oddly enough, that's the one behind Mr. Wright's house and by the high school, was the repair of Big Fossil Creek. And if you remember on that one, we had the bank was sloughing off. Again, we had to expend emergency funds. And I'm not sure what the total tab was on that one, but I want to say it was in the $400,000 to $500,000 range. So what I'm getting at is drainage isn't cheap. Yes, it's another tax, but it's a necessary tax in my mind. Haltom City has got to start looking for the future. We've got to start identifying appropriate, realistic, and appropriate amount of funding to these matters. And I think by adopting a drainage utility, you're taking a step in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Van Uyen Hughes. Our next speaker is Mr. Ray Eklund. Mr. Eklund, if you will, when you come to the speaker stand, give us your name and address for the record, and you have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My name is Ray Eklund. I live at 2532 Oakwood Terrace. I sent each of you an email this past week regarding this matter in my extended opinion, but I'll hold it to 6 minutes here. I'm sure each of you are skilled at your jobs that you go to all day and before you come here, and your boss and your coworkers depend on you to be able to get your job done. And I think when you come here at night, in the evenings, and you try to be a council member, you have to depend on the city staff and the professionals that you hire, such as Ms. Diane Palmer, to give you professional discussions about the issues. This is a big engineering issue. It took a long time. They ordered this last year. I think the study cost $50,000 or $60,000 to get to this point. That's a big investment of the city, and we need this program of some matter to take care of our citizens. We all know the drainage problems. We remember the young man that was caught in the water up here. We've had people actually drowned in our drainage areas years back. Okay, and it continues to be a problem with the maintenance of the areas. This report was given to the entire council in the little room next door several weeks ago, and I was present at that meeting. It was a full meeting, and the council was here. And you went through the issue, and you discussed the levels of service. There were, 8 or 10 or 12 of them, to get us through this and what we might charge as a fee. One comment that I heard in that room was, how are we going to sell this politically? Now, I'm asking the council to consider what's right. It's not a political contest on all these issues. It's a matter of doing what's right. We're talking about safety issues. We're talking about property values. We're talking about future development in areas of our city to be taken care of. So these are what we all say we want. We want these development things. We want these safety issues. We want our streets better. We want our drainage right. This is your opportunity to move forward and make those happen. the paper quoted one of our council members as still being undecided. Now, I was in the meeting, and everybody seemed to be right on track with the thing, and I like to think that by listening to the professional staff, now you have them come up here and talk to you about finance issues and different kinds of things, that we should really give them a good ear on what they know they're talking about. Tonight we heard from an engineer who lives in our city. Thank you, Greg, for sharing your experience with us. But there's a big difference between professional advice and uninformed opinion. It takes a lot of effort to sit in all the meetings that y'all have to go through, right? And we try to visit with you as much as we can. That's a lot of effort for the citizens to get educated, right? The citizens need to make that effort. We've tried to provide an opportunity and a venue on the web for them to do that. The mayor once said, sitting in that chair, that there's a big difference between a politician and a statesman, and that the politician's working for the next election and the statesman's working for the next generation. This is one of those issues. You have to decide, are you willing to take a little bit of heat now and take care of this town? We'll remember who took care of the town, right? I'm surprised to hear that the council will not be addressing the fee tonight. I thought y'all looked at that. I'm surprised that you have go ahead and move forward with it. I'm sure that we'll all be down here visiting about that again. I'd like to ask each of you to approve this with the understanding that you're moving the city forward, you're taking care of our infrastructure, and looking to the future of our city. That's what we've been down here talking about for a long time. That's what we expect out of our council, and I think this is a good opportunity for you to get there. Drainage is not an attractive thing. It's not fun. It's a lot more fun to go build something pretty and new, okay? I prefer to paint the outside of the house than fix the leaky roof, but you have to do these things in order to take care of the citizens as a whole. The comments earlier were that this was going to cause an undue burden on some people. I did a figure on a property that I do know how much the flood insurance is, right? And it will save $56 a month of the person that lives in that house when this passes and that flood issue gets taken care of down there. Besides the safety issues, besides the property values, besides the economic development, it's going to save that one homeowner $56 a month in flood insurance. Okay? The council was told maybe they weren't qualified to decide this. I find that kind of odd because you were perfectly qualified to decide the senior tax freeze, which is going to cost every bit as much. Okay? The public has to make an effort to be educated. We've tried to provide that on haltomcitycitizen.com. We're going to continue to attend the meetings. We're going to continue to try to bring this forward. But again, the citizens have to make an effort as well.
Mr. Eklund, you 5 minutes and 30 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to ask the council to pass this, and with the level of commitment that you've discussed prior at level 5 or 6, we'll start to actually see some results and get this town taken care of. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Eklund. Our next speaker who filled out an appearance before the council sheet earlier is Mr. R.D. Milholland. Mr. Milholland, if you will, come forward at this time and give us your name and address for the record, and you have 6 minutes.
Thank you. I'm R.D. Milholland, 3711 Jean Lane. Mayor, members of the City Council, I believe we need a master drainage plan. What urban area doesn't? I was thinking of a worst-case scenario, Arlington. There's no plan there for years to allow for increased drainage as brought on by the intensive shopping center development, apartment development that happened there in the 70s and 80s. And now, whenever it rains more than usual, people along Johnson Creek evacuate. The city there is trying to buy out the houses that have been most effective, but it's much more expensive now than it would have been back if planning had not allowed homes to be built in the projected floodway, if they had bothered projecting it back then. Arlington's been through several failed bond elections trying to solve the problem they themselves created through years of neglect in planning and in allowing the developers to decide city policy and budget. Haltom City's waited long enough. It's time to do something now. I do have several concerns about this. In general, I would recommend, I would hope that you would be for the idea of this. But there's several things I have questions about as I've looked through it, and I'll just go through just a couple. First is the incidence of the fee impact. This is the question of who will bear the brunt of the burden of the fees that will be needed to implement whatever plan is adopted. State law authorizing this plan requires the fee structure be fair and reasonable among the customer classes. And if you look at I just looked at the presentation on the city website, and the classes that are mentioned there are residences, businesses, government property, churches, and school property. There seems to be a question as to whether the last three classes might be exempt from this fee. Okay, federal government routinely makes itself exempt from just about anything that a city containing their property might impose, including nuclear weapons storage in Amarillo. I don't know of any federal land in Haltom City, so this is a good thing from a taxing or fee collection standpoint. But I would be interested in knowing why churches and schools might be exempt. Each of these kinds of facilities pays water taxes, and the drainage impact fee is another similar collection, according to what I've read. Water customers who don't pay the fee may have their water cut off, according to the information on the city website. Does this apply to all property owners? The fee seems to be based roughly on the amount of property an owner has that is impervious. That is, when it rains, the water runs off into the creek instead of down into the ground. Roofs and pavement count here. But so the more you have, the more you owe. Now, I heard something different tonight. So I'll be interested to see how that comes along. City code, as was mentioned earlier, does require driveways to be made of impervious materials. Even though the materials exist to construct parking areas, it would allow drainage water to seep in, not draining off and adding to the drainage or flooding problem. Is this a contradiction or an unfair requirement considering the fee implication? This pavement requirement would affect the homeowner with a deep setback from the street. The owner of an RV required to keep it on a paved pad, and a business with an overflow parking lot that might be constructed to be impervious. Rainwater soaking into the ground replenishes the groundwater over time and with adequate permeable surface area. In an urban area, a certain amount of paved streets are a necessity, of course, but parking might be viewed as in an alternative light. I'm thinking about church parking. It's severely underutilized as compared to business. Church parking is only used to full capacity on Sunday mornings and to a much lower level Sunday nights and Wednesdays. For Seventh-day Adventists or for synagogues or mosques, adjust accordingly. Should they be required to have impermeable surfaces? In all fairness, if they have a huge paved lot that sends water crashing into the creek after a rain, should they be charged the fee? Should churches and businesses that arrange a deal to share a parking area be able to enjoy a lessened impact fee? If this kind of relationship, a co-op parking arrangement for parking lot, this would conceivably lessen the amount of runoff. It seems like it might be an appropriate thing to consider. It looks like the paved ground in our city, it looks like a lot of paved ground in our city is only seldom used for parking. It seems a waste. The same goes to a lesser extent with schools whose lots are currently empty during 2 months of the summer. Schools and churches are water customers. They contribute to water runoff. They should contribute fairly to the mitigation of the problems associated with runoff. Exemptions would be in contradiction to the fair and reasonable requirement of the authorizing law. What about residents, both private citizens and companies that might choose to collect runoff water to use for irrigation or other purposes, thus lessening the runoff from their properties? Should there be an exemption or adjustment for installing such equipment?
Mr. Milholland, you're at 5 minutes, 30 seconds.
Thank you, Mayor.
Another 30 seconds, if you would wrap up, please.
I will. I believe such property owners should get an exemption. Even though a large portion of the city budget is derived from water sales, the conservation of this essential and in most years scarce resource should be encouraged. The state of Texas exempts sales of water conservation equipment like cisterns, roof washers, etc. from sales taxation. The state guys thinks it's important. We should too. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Milholland, and that completes those who had filled out a request to address the council card before the council meeting started. That having been to anyone in the audience who would like to address the council and give us your comments regarding whether or not the city of Haltom City should establish a municipal stormwater utility system. So is there anyone? Okay, Mr. Williams? Okay. Mr. Worthington? And just feel free to stand up. You don't need to raise your hand. Just get up and move on up this way. If you'll give us your name and address for the record, Mr. Worthington, and you have
Bill Worthington. I live at
6
2020
minutes.
Elton Road, which is in the south part of town, in case you don't know. Several years ago, FEMA came up with their 100-year floodplain. And because of the Little Fossil Creek, or the restriction of Little Fossil Creek going under Airport Freeway, the 100-year floodplain includes the area that I live in. I haven't had to have flood insurance because I've lived in my house for 44 years. And hope they haul me out feet first from there someday. But several years ago, the citizens of Haltom City passed a bond issue on Little Fossil Creek. It hasn't been touched. It isn't even maintained by the city. Just go down there and there's trees and brush. Trees as big around as my belly here have grown up in that thing and no one looks at it. This causes a problem worse than what Airport Freeway underpass or what a bridge is. Henry Wright brought up a very good point. This so-called fee that you want to charge everybody who has a water connection, a flat fee. It's a tax. We plan to pay for the bond issue that we were talking about with a tax. This sort of thing should be paid for by a tax too. People that have the bigger 5-acre lot with a $200,000 home on it should pay more than what I do with a 60-foot wide lot with 1,200-foot house on it. And it definitely means a lot to people like myself who are retired on a very fixed income. Well, it was fixed until the stock market went down. And I'm in a fix now. Another thing that was brought up about undeveloped property exemption. To me, undeveloped property should not be totally exempt because there is runoff even for non-impervious surfaces. I brought up the problem of maintenance of creeks. That ought to be done by the park department or somebody all the time and not have to come up with some sort of an emergency thing like we're talking about at this time. When I moved here in 1960, there were very few curbs and no storm sewers in Haltom City. In 1968, there was a bond issue passed to put curbs and gutters on the main streets, which was Haltom Road and a few like that. And that relieved a lot of full gutters, full ditches, I would say. Most of the streets that we have now don't have just ditches on either side like they did then. They have curbs and gutters. A few, like in where I live, everything in my development at that time went into 2 little storm drains that went into a ditch. It was bad engineering. But then 12 years later, the city allowed the same bad engineering for 17 acres just east of me. it's almost flat. I don't know, working on the Planning and Zoning Commission for several years, I looked at that with pretty jaundiced eyes on the way that engineering was done in some areas. And I see Ernie's left tonight. We involved him in some conversations considerably in some of these same areas. But in my opinion, if we have to have some development like this, it should not be on a fee basis. It should be on a tax basis. And if you're going to bite the bullet and start a development like this, also bite the bullet and raise the taxes to do it. Be honest with people and do it on an equal basis for everybody involved. Thank you. I'll give you back a minute.
Thank you, Mr. Worthington, and you did, and we appreciate that. Mr. Williams, I believe you're next. Your name and address for the record, please, and you have 6 minutes.
John Williams, 4609 Biscayne, Haltom City, Texas. Mayor, city manager, council, counselor, and city secretary. Appreciate the time and get allowed to come up here and do this. I had sent emails to each and every one of you, and I appreciate Mr. Langford being the very first to coming back and Ms. Branson being the very second to come back with the email. Returning the emails I'd sent concerning this. Mr. Sutton, finally I got his this afternoon. First of all, like Mr. Worthington says, is it a tax or is it a fee? Either way you go, it's a fee, it's a tax. It's one way or the other. It's not going to be popular for what y'all do. I was a little concerned when I found out that back when I was on the council, we'd approved a $65,000 study for this to go on. And also there was some money loaned, I think, from the EDC, which I was on the EDC. And I was very concerned that this $100,000 wasn't paid back on the first note in November of '03. Partially my fault. I was sitting on the council at that time. I don't know why it wasn't paid back. I didn't ask. It didn't come up. So I don't know who's at fault there. That money does need to be paid back immediately to the EDC. As I sit and look at all 7 of you, 8 including the mayor, do any of y'all own a business in Haltom City? I don't think you do. If you do, let me know different. And I think maybe only one of you works for a company that has a business in Haltom City. I notice it's $6 is what's going to be recommended for the residential area, and it's going to be more than that for a business. My business is going to be probably about $50 a month on top of the $6 more I have to pay at my home. I have a restroom at my business and a laboratory. When I bought my business in 1981, my water bill ran about $17 a month. It's edged its way all the way up to $19 a month now. If this goes into effect, it's going to be $70 a month. Yes, Mr. Worthington, that is a tax. There needs to be some way to make it fair for everybody. I look at some money that we spent in the last couple of years, a couple of recall elections. We fixed some property up on Haltom Road, on Denton Highway, private property. Quite a sum of money was spent there. This money could all went toward the study and toward that. I remember in 1963, I got my driver's license when I was 14. Now that's scary, but where Glenview Drive cuts across, I was coming from North Richland Hills back toward Haltom City in early April, and there was a rainstorm. And there was a young lady there sitting in a 60 Plymouth in the middle of the ditch there. And thank God for 53 Chevrolets, they would go through anything. I was able to push her through the dry weather crossing and get her out of there. So we've had this problem prior to tonight, prior to last 2003 when this came up. This has been a going on problem. It's our fault for sitting and letting it go around. There's some frivolous charges for ethics. And I think the mayor would probably agree with those too. I remember in some of the stuff put out during the bond election, there was pictures of cars and stuff, and I think one of them was the 60 Plymouth sitting in high water and wasn't able to move. So this picture had to be taken back sometime in the mid-60s. So this isn't something that sneaked up on us last week. It didn't sneak up on us in 2003. It's something that has been going on for a long time and has been ignored for a long time. I know it's something we're going to have to do, but I challenge each and every one of you, especially since you don't own a business here. I see a lot of my business friends here that do own businesses. It's going to be a very hard thing on them. Business is terrible right now. Economy is awful. So as y'all sit there and think about your $6 a month that y'all are going to have to pay or your neighbor's going to pay, think about these people that are going to have to pay a lot more money and try to figure out if you have came up with the most equitable way to make it even on everybody. The senior tax freeze, the $10,000 exemption we gave last year, I think saved probably $35, $40 a year for the taxpayer. On a senior citizen, that $35 that you gave back to them, you're doubling it back on them, $72 a year. So, and I don't think being a senior citizen, I don't think you're going to be exempt from that. And one deal that Mrs. Palmer spoke of earlier in her deal, by putting this tax or this fee on there, we'll be able to redirect. I'm sorry, I'm not supposed to look at her, but we'll be able to redirect this money back into the general fund to be spent elsewhere. You just got through raising the taxes 2 cents, and then you knew this was coming on top of it. I would have rather seen a larger tax increase to go toward doing this and made this a smaller problem to make it more equitable. But that's in y'all's hands, and I would appreciate when I sit down and take time to write y'all an email that y'all send me an email back. That's all I have, and somebody else can have my other 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Our next speaker, Mr. Hafley. Mr. Hafley, if you'll give us your name and address for the record, we will appreciate it. You have 6 minutes.
I'll try to take less. I'm Randy Hafley. I live at 2606 Perkins Road in Arlington. My business is located along Airport Freeway in South Haltom City. And I guess I'm kind of an unofficial spokesman for the Airport Freeway property owners. We have felt as a group for some time through many different councils that a drainage utility or drainage fee would be a proper way to get the money and put the burden more fairly where it goes than it presently is. Right now, school districts, churches are exempt from property taxes, so even though they contribute to the water that runs down the ditch next to my office, they aren't paying in property taxes anyway the cost of maintaining that ditch. In our situation, we've got a 80-foot easement that actually I'm taxed for. It's a highway department easement. The responsibility legally to clean that ditch rests with Haltom City, has for many years. They cleaned it out in full for the last time in 1985. We have gotten some help down there, which we very much appreciate. Recently, they did come down and clean out half of the ditch, and I think the grate all broke or something, but it ain't done, and it's not showing any signs of getting done. I've said that the business community, I think, does support a drainage fee. Yes, it is kind of a tax, but at least it gets pointed towards a specific cause and not the general fund. But I would encourage you to be very cautious with the fee structure that I've seen here, because in my mind it's much too high and it doesn't appear to be competitive with the towns that are most immediately adjacent to us, North Richland Hills and Richland Hills, unless I just didn't understand what I was looking at there. I would also like to say that, the business community and the citizens made quite an effort on the bond program, specifically regarding the Little Fossil situation. We did pass a bond issue, and I think at this time the $1,806.08 that was one of two apparently discretionary items ought to come out of the talks for this, because the citizens approved that out of separate funds. It shouldn't be coming back in the back door in this group of funds. So I guess I'm coming down on both sides of the issue. Yes, I think that it's something that's needed in Haltom City, but put your toe in the water very carefully on that. And, we charge, this will be something we'll have to pass along to our tenants. We need to keep these businesses competitive and in Haltom City, so don't put us at a competitive disadvantage with North Richland Hills, Richland Hills, and some of the others that we compete with for tenants. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hafley. Mr. Fowler?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Trey Fowler, 6217 Midway, Haltom City, Texas. I guess I'm also in agreement with Mr. Hafley and Mr. Van Nieuwenhuis somewhat. I feel like this is I guess a necessary evil. It's something that needs to be done. To the extent that y'all are looking at, I don't know that I don't know that I'm quite prepared to agree with that at all. As a matter of fact, I can tell you I'm not. As a business owner, you're looking at one tract of property that I have is 5 acres, and if you're talking about $50 a month, I use about 3/4 of an acre of that property. But I'm not clear on whether y'all going to tax me on the whole 5 acres. Well, if you do, you're talking about a water bill that I already pay somewhere in the neighborhood of $400 to $600 a month on, to now to add another $250 a month, which computes to $3,000 a year. You have to take that into account. I look at this sheet that y'all provided for the citizens out front. And, we talked about equity, and Mr. Worthington made mention of that. The first residential property looks like it covers about 55% of the piece of property is covered with impervious material. So you're looking at $6.14 for it, and yet the next piece of property is single family also. It's 44,000 square foot, and yet has 4,000 square foot of impervious, which is about 10% of the entire property, and it's still $6.14. And yet I go down here to a piece of commercial property that's only covered about 60% of its total square footage, and yet you're talking about $137 a month, if I'm reading that correctly. So I don't know that maybe y'all have had enough, and not to discredit Ms. Palmer. I think that I think it's a good starting point, but I think you have to look at it from the business environment as well as the residents also. But you talk about adding $1,500 a year, to a $3,000 a year to a commercial piece of property. That's a lot of money for a business to come up with. And I hope y'all take that into consideration. I had some questions that I would like to ask, and that's not saying that I'm against it. I think it's something that we need to do. I just, when I see the statistics that you're looking at being competitive or being the third one down from Austin and Watauga and then Haltom City, and then I look at all these other cities that have such a seem like that they have a lot better business environment to work with, and yet you're talking about being the third one down, and it's a lot of money. I mean, especially out of 28. I had a question on the part of it. What is the need for repayment of previous debt that's already been taxed for? Why are we going to go back and say we need this tax to go back and pay for a big fossil channel that was done, the improvements were done, 3 or 4 years ago? Why do we need to repay debt on little fossil stuff that taxpayers as myself and y'all, we've already paid for? We've already been taxed for that, and it's already been budgeted for, yet we're going to be taxed again to say we're going to go back and repay that? Maybe we need to look at the things that we're trying to improve and how far we're trying to go with this money. I think that's something we definitely need to take into consideration. Part of the thing that said that this money could be utilized for would be street repair, curb and gutter, repayment of previous debt, those things. I pay property taxes to pay for the street construction department. I think that's where we're getting into the things, as you had made mention, or Mr. Watkinson made mention too, in the EDC money. We're robbing Peter to pay Paul. You know, we go over here and we borrow $300,000 or $400,000 from EDC, which that money was designed to do economic development, not do drainage repair. You know, and to me, if I'm going to pay for a water utility district, I want it to go and be for water or for stormwater improvements. I don't want to loosely call street repair because I know what ends up happening. You know, I've sat up there with y'all and I know what ends up happening. You know, we take this project and we kind of loosely tie it to stormwater, which really it's 90% street improvement. But yet we're using funds that aren't really supposed to be used for that project, and we're moving them over and using them for something else. And I don't think that that's good business. I don't think that's a good business practice that we need to continue in. I think we need to look at that from y'all's standpoint and determine, you know, if we're gonna set up a drainage utility, like Mr. Hafley had said, let's be fair with it. Let's not tag, you know, a business owner. We say it's fair and equitable, yet you take and it's, you know, I use the carpool, for instance. If you have a commercial vehicle and it's towed, your storage on it, or a residential, say a regular car or truck, is $15 a day storage up at AA Wrecker. If you have a commercial vehicle, it's $30. It's double. But yet in this, the way this reads, it's $6 for a residence, and it's $50 an acre for the same 1 acre tract. So where's the equity in that? You know, you're talking about being 5 times more, 6 times more.
Mr. Fowler, you're at 5 minutes and 30 seconds.
I just hope that
continue.
those are some things that we consider. I'm not denying that there's not a necessity for it, and I think that that's something that y'all, you know, are going to have to do, and I don't disagree with that. But I just, once again, I hope you'll look at the equity between commercial and residential, and even between the classes of residential also. I hope y'all take that into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fowler. Do we have anyone else in the audience? Yes, sir. Mr. Clower, if you'll give us your name and address for the record, and like the other speakers, you have 6 minutes.
Hi, my name is Wayne Clowers. I'm at 5809 Highland. I wanted to stand up and say that I agree with Bill Worthington, what he had to say, and also point out that this is a tax increase, and in some cases a extra or dual tax, because when you start talking about switching one to the other, it's going to become a dual. You will bypass the approval by citizens for capital improvements, and I don't like that. And I do not care that the state has set up the plan that allows this.
Thank you, Mr. Clower. Anyone else in the audience wish to speak on this subject? Yes, if you will give us your name and address for the record. My mind slipped.
You know what it is.
I know. You live down
David
on
Morris,
right.
live at 2425 Harrow, and that's on Little Fossil. I'm in the floodway, not the flood plain, so nothing we've talked about tonight is going to reduce my flood insurance. That 45% figure up there won't ever happen. I'll continue to pay my flood insurance. Call it a fee, it's a tax. It needs to be taken care of through taxes, don't pull city services out of an area where they have always been taken care of and separate them. It's kind of like the phone bill you get every month, and I bet you don't like them. All the little separate fees, state fee, franchise fee, you know, you pay for all these little extra things, and that's what the water bill, pretty soon the water bill is going to look like the telephone bill. You're not going to know what the charges are or have any earthly idea at all. You know, so let's pay for this. If we need it, let's pay for it with taxes, not fees that are separated out from something that you're already paying for. And you can have the rest of my time back.
Thank you, Mr. Morris. Anyone else in the audience wish to address the council during this public hearing? Okay, there Being none, I will close the public hearing at this time, and we'll move forward to council discussion and action. Before we do, Mr. Muir, any comments you'd like to make regarding any matters that may have come up during the course of citizen comments?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. I'll just comment on some of the things that I heard. I'm not going to take them in any particular order. Just in the order that I wrote them down here, and they're all kind of scattered around. I've heard a lot of comments about equity. The residential rates being $614, proposed rate being $614, and that somebody, small house, is paying the same thing as a $200,000 house. Part of that, I understand that concern. Part of the issue part of the direction that I gave was that in creating this, it's also got to be maintained. And if there's a host of different rates for all the different many houses and residential properties in town, then I'm spending a lot of money in staff time, in administration time, just sorting that out. And I don't think you want your stormwater money going to that. Trying to find something that was easy to manage, but yet as equitable as it could be. Could it be more equitable? Yes, but there's a cost with it because it's going to take a lot of time to sort that out. The proposed rates are aggressive. I'm painfully aware of that. They are very aggressive. Most of the cities that you saw referenced there with possibly lower rates, they've had those rates in place for many years. And when they put those rates in place, they did nothing with their money. They sat there and banked it and collected it, and then they'd probably issue some debt off of it, to do something with it. What I'm proposing to do with this utility is that you're going to see bang for your buck right away, because the drainage issues in this town are that significant. Again, that's just a proposal. The level of service that the council decides to do, if this thing were to pass, could certainly change. It could go down. I guess it could go up. I don't know. But that's one of the main reasons why you're seeing a difference between what other cities do and what we're proposing to do, because we haven't done it. We haven't done so many things for so long, or never have done them, that there's so many issues to deal with trying to get in the creeks right away. We don't have staff that's committed to it. We don't have the resources. They go to the only time that we're in the creeks is pretty much on an as-needed basis, and that need's got to be pretty significant for us to get in those creeks, because we just don't have the time or the resources to get down there. Continuing with fairness, there was comments about the schools and churches, and that's one reason why this is not a tax, because if it were a tax, then the churches and schools would be exempt. I think with the amount of impervious property that the churches and schools have, they need to share this burden, and the proposed ordinance that you have, that the council has before them, does not exempt the schools and churches. State law, the way this was set up, allows the councils to be able to do that. This does not. They will be paying their fair share, just like every business and every resident in this community. If it were a tax, they wouldn't be doing it. If it were a tax, then the residences would be shouldering a greater burden than what this utility proposes. I'd venture to say, based on the $6.14, I think our finance director was telling me it'd be almost $8 a month if it were a tax. So I'm not sure that's the way that they're really wanting to go. I don't know what value you get doing that. Parking lots, continuing with parking lots, the fairness of parking lots. I think Mr. Milholland was talking about some of the issues regarding that, and that in a lot of the strip centers or the parking lots are shared by multiple tenants. Those parking lots are going to be proportioned out by the amount of square footage that they have in that development, in that center. So there is a system in place to apportion that the charge for that parking lot. Little Fossil Creek, heard several comments regarding the bonds that were passed on that. This will not fund that debt that was passed by those bonds. What you saw on the screen there is it's eligible for that. That's not part of the plan. That's not within the 614 range of the cost of service that we're looking at, but it is eligible to be reimbursed. We're not proposing that. We don't think that's something that should be done. Now, what the utility is going to do is it is going to fund some additional things that were not presented with the Little Fossil Bond project, because that thing was passed in '01. In the design, there have been some things that have come up with that. That $4 million was only our part of a $13 million project. There's going to be, and there already are, some additional issues with that need to be addressed. This will help us deal with that. It's not dealing with the $4 million. That's totally separate. It's not going to be funding that. At least that's not the proposal at this time. That could change if the council so chooses. Those are some of the comments I heard, and there may be some more that I'll certainly address as the council seems to ask questions. I know Mr. Wright and I had a conversation today about, and he alluded to it, that the communication that we have with the citizens, and Mr. Eklund alluded to the workshop that we had over a month ago regarding this topic, to where y'all saw a very similar presentation to what Ms. Palmer gave today, Ms. Price gave today, and having the presentation available on our website, having it available in City Hall. Maybe there's better ways for us to get the message out to the citizens. Dealing with the timing constraints and stuff, I'm not real sure how else to go about that, other than possibly having more public hearings regarding this topic. Again, the reason we're here tonight is mainly just talking about the need for the utility. And I think from what you've heard from a lot of the speakers here, the majority of them do agree there's a need. I think the issue comes down to the level of funding for it. And it's, as I said before, it is aggressive. Admittedly, it is aggressive.
Thank you, Mr. Muir. Members of the council, before I ask for a motion, any comments you'd like to make? Councilmember Lanford and then Councilmember Reese.
Thank you, Mayor White. One thing that was brought up earlier, mentioned the Highway 121 flume being undersized. I was wondering if the city manager or city engineer, someone, consultant, could address that issue, that this is not wasted money just because we have a small waterway going under 121 there at Little Fossil, that it's money well spent ahead of time whenever the state gets around to correcting that down in 121.
Yeah. As Bennett's coming up, he'll be able to address Bennett's our Howell. Had a brain freeze. Bennett Howell, our city engineer. I'm sorry, Bennett. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. The issues along Little Fossil Creek are not just caused by the 121 bridge. It's an issue all the way up through it. So the flooding and the floodplain issues is caused more than just the bridge issues. So the Corps of Engineers project will take into account and redesign the creek to mitigate the problems that the bridge causes, but there's also the issues all the way through the creek.
And I'm not sure, I'm not sure we're going to be able to determine exactly what those causes are until we do a master plan. Right. And the utility does so many other things. I mean, it creates a plan for dealing with the curbs and gutters, or the serious lack of them. The curbs and gutters in this town are terrible. A lot of issues regarding those. but to determine whether the 121 flumes are undersized or not, no one's really going to be able to tell that until we do a master plan.
Mr. Howell, in connection with that, as an engineer, if we cleaned all of the stuff out of the bottom of the creek and widened it out, that would help the water flow through that narrower area down under 121. Is that fair to assume?
Yes, sir. Any maintenance done along any of the creeks and ditches will help the city in the long run.
I know Mr. Worthington spoke earlier about the trees and the growth and the sandbars and the gravel bars across there, and that has to impede water, and when water's impeded, it's going to back up behind that. So this may not be the solve all, do all to everything with that restriction there at 121, but it certainly would increase the water flow and get that water on through there quicker if it were cleaned out.
One of the things that the utility is trying to do is have a full-time maintenance crews do nothing but work on the ditches and the creeks, not just Little Fossil, not just Big Fossil, but we have drainage ditches throughout this whole city that they're in dire need of repair. Some of the ditches are along people's streets. Some of the ditches are major drainage ways. So it's a whole comprehensive maintenance on the system.
Councilmember Lanford, did you have further questions for Mr. Howell?
Let me see. I don't think for Mr. Howell I did. I've got some other questions here.
Okay, may I ask if other members of the council, while Mr. Howell's up here, anyone else have a question for Mr. Howell? Okay, thank you, Mr. Howell. Mr. Lanford, and then Councilmember Reese and Councilmember Sutton.
Yeah, one of the things that I think came up several times through here is a sense of overlapping of various bond issues from the past and how the drainage utility fits into that picture there. And I was just wondering if we could get just sort of a high level, 20,000 feet, how all that stuff fits together, because I understand that a lot of the bonds that have been passed previously, as you alluded to, Tom, do go directly to cooperative efforts that the city has with other entities for much larger projects. And I guess what I'm hearing is that there's not a real clear understanding how the drainage utility fits into that overall picture.
Sure. While our finance director, Joel Welsh, is coming, let me just say something regarding that. What's being proposed, and as far as providing some relief for like the general fund or the water and sewer funds, which mainly will get that. If it provides that relief, or even reimburses it, then the general fund is freed up to do either other things, or if the council's wanting to adjust the rate accordingly, the property tax rate accordingly with that, that's an option the council can do. It's just a clear drainage issue that's either been funded by the general fund or the water and sewer fund to try and help reduce some of the burden. Joel may be able to address that a little bit more specifically. He's not making his way yet, so I don't know if he wants to or not.
I was going to, at this point, ask you to kind of clarify which things you want me to talk about.
Well, what I was wondering was a kind of a high-level overview of how the drainage utility funds that are, the drainage utility itself, if we fund it, how those funds will be used with respect in relationship to other bond issues that have already been approved in the past that are part of larger projects with other entities such as U.S. Corps of Engineers or North Texas Council of Governments, along Big Fossil and Little Fossil. My understanding is a lot of that previous bond money that's been already issued, and the monies have already been We've already got the money for that. How this utility money will be spent in relationship to those other bond issues that have already been previously passed. And because I think the sense is that there's some overlap there, and there may be, and there may not be. And I'd just like from a high level, from 30,000 feet, I'd like to hear how, from a financial perspective, what the relationship is.
Okay, what I'm going to talk about very briefly is I'll talk about the two notes, just generally referenced as the EDC loans, and the bonds that we sold just recently for the drainage project. At the current level of presentation, which I believe is number 7, plan, which is the $6.14 per month, will fund the repayment of the EDC loans, any portion that isn't already paid. And I would mention that there has been some renegotiation with the EDC, talks between the city and the EDC, to renegotiate an updated payment schedule to get these notes back on track. And there are certain payments required to be made at November 1 of this year, and then it's September 1 of next year. But regardless of the source, if the drainage district is approved at the current $6.14 level, the drainage utility will assume those payments and pay off those notes under the agreement that's been renegotiated. As far as the little fossil bonds, at this point, this plan does not contemplate paying that debt service. One of the scenarios we did explore was a what if we use the drainage utility to pay for those bonds and free up the tax rate from paying debt service on $4 million of debt.
Yeah, that's cost of service 8.
Yes.
There, isn't that correct?
Yes, cost of service 8, the next level up, which is, that's the 766.
That's the next level down, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Number 8.
I'm thinking number
is-
higher, but yeah, on the page it's the next level down.
Right.
But at this point, in terms of any existing debt or existing notes, all we're really talking about is the little fossil bonds, which were just sold, and the EDC loans. Now, the plan at the $6.14 level does anticipate the issuance of new debt, but that would be a separate issue. But that is all of the existing debt that we're actually talking about with reference to these issues.
Okay, let me ask you just a real straightforward question. If we don't fund this at all, we just don't have it, is the city going to pay back EDC?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So there's really, it doesn't really make any difference, because in my mind, there's no connection between the funding of the utility district and the payback of the EDC. We're just taking money from this and using it to pay back EDC versus money from over here and paying back EDC. But it's going to be paid back anyway.
It's an
So I
obligation
mean,
of the
because I
city.
want to make clear that I'm not supporting this because it pays back EDC. I support it because we need it, and not because it's going to pay back some EDC loan.
Yes. The EDC has to be repaid. The note has
Absolutely.
to be repaid.
Yeah. Okay.
Regardless.
Fair enough. That was the only question I had about that. And if somebody else got a question for Joel?
No question for Joel. You have another
Yeah.
question or two? You have a question for Joel?
Yeah, going on the same vein there, Bill. It looks like, to me, and my understanding of this is that whenever the EDC loan was made by the previous council, for whatever reason, that there was really insufficient property tax revenues at that time to pay for those drainage emergencies that existed at the time.
As this is a little before my time, so I'm having to rely upon my understanding of history, but there was in the fall of 2002 a great deal of fiscal hardship for the city. There was some uncertainty. There was a number of things being changed in the budgeting process of the city as well. Some systems or some services that had been historically budgeted using other funds, that was being changed as well as part of the budget process. So there was some fiscal difficulty and some fiscal uncertainty at the time those notes were made.
Right, and Tom, you're probably more aware of that than Joe would be.
Yes.
Do you want to comment on that?
Well, he's accurate for not being here. He's fairly accurate. At the time in the fall of 2002, the previous city manager had done a big shuffling of some resources, and the need for the loan at that time that was. I'm kind of in the same position Joel is, kind of catching up to it because I was not involved in it. But after I think the thing was done with the intent that this stormwater utility was going to be in place much sooner than it is now. Right. I mean, when we executed the contract with Palmer Price in July, I think the tracking was for sometime in spring or late spring, early summer of this year. And obviously, with the issues our community's been through, that's taken a back seat, and it's just now being brought forward. But because of that, I mean, certainly things with the loans and stuff had to be redone, and that's what we've done. As far as presented something to the EDC to see if that was something they would be able to do, and they've acquiesced.
It's certainly a complex issue, but it certainly seems in part that this was a necessity to take care of an emergency drainage situation that existed, and there was not a stormwater drain utility fund in place to address that need at that time.
It's accurate.
Councilmember Lanford, you have another question?
No, list of them. But I'm getting through them pretty quick.
Okay. Please go ahead, Councilmember Reeves.
One of the issues that has been pretty consistent here, and I really appreciate all the citizens coming up and the comments. One of the consistent issues is about fee equity. Had some questions about that. Certainly, at the first presentation. Would it be fair to say, Diane, that I think I saw this somewhere, that an attempt was made, again from a high level, to have equity, just sheer equity, among all users, residents and commercial, based approximately on the amount of impervious surface, depending on whether it was residential or commercial, understanding that in most cases, commercial has relatively more impervious surface than residents, but that at least the attempt was made, and going into sorting out how we were going to divide this up, that equity was, you did attempt to do that.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
The primary basis in which we looked at all the data was to distribute or to define the cost across who's causing the cost. In other words, we went and did an inventory of all of the parcels in town as required by the law. We looked at what kind of land use was on each parcel. If you notice in your subdivision ordinances and all your engineering criteria, if you have a residential parcel, you're assuming that probably about 50% of it is improved in some fashion with a house, with driveways, with sidewalks. A commercial property is much more dense. Many of the properties along Belknap, for instance, if you go and drive down the street, they're 100% impervious. And when a drop of rain drops on those properties, it's all going to run off. On a very large residential lot, you may have 2 or 3 acres of property that has a lot of grass on it, and a house that may be very similar in size to a property on the north side of town that has a much smaller lot, but relatively compared to a commercial property, they produce about the same amount of runoff. And so, as Tom mentioned earlier, one of the things you really want to consider in going forward with the utility is what does it take for you to administer the utility and collect the money. And so we look at everything on a more global basis. There have been cities, Golden, Colorado is one that comes to mind, that has gone in and very precisely digitized every square foot on every lot in town. They spent over $1 million doing that. I don't know that it's necessarily any more fair, because when you go back and look at the data, then most of, in particularly in Haltom City is a city where most of the residential properties are fairly uniform. You don't have 50,000 square foot mansions, you know, in one section of town. Most of them are middle class, very reasonable houses. They're, you know, 2,500 square feet in that range. And we did an inventory of those parcels, compared it to the overall total of commercial properties, looking at multifamily, looking at commercial, looking at residential, looking at churches and a lot of different properties, and we added that up as a whole. So we have a total square footage in town that's producing runoff, and that's what the fee is based on. It's really, even though it's averaged over the residential properties so that it's a flat fee, and the commercial properties are individual, we actually set the fee on a per square foot rate for all of the square footage in town, and it relates to the runoff potential from those properties.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. And one other question before you leave.
I think Councilmember Sutton has a question for you, and then Councilmember Lanford, we're back to you.
Bill, could I ask her a question while she's up? Okay. How much work would it be, and do you think that we'd gain any more equity if we were to shift some of the commercial costs over to the residential, or would that be going in toward more equity or not?
I don't, as a person that does a lot of cost of service studies and rate and designs rates, and the way we design the study is very much like all the other cities have designed it. It is in accordance with standard rate making practices. AWWA and a lot of technical organizations on a national level have a process by which you go through and develop fees for utilities. It's very similar to a water and sewer utility, where you have a residential water services that are of a 1-inch size, for instance, or a 3/4 inch size, are treated very similarly all the way across the city. Now, if you have a 6-inch water meter, yes, you're going to pay a lot more because you're using a lot more water, and it's the same premise. It's like a residential property that may have a 2,500 square foot house on it does not produce the amount of runoff that a 10-acre fully concrete commercial property might produce. And we are not using water usage because that's not what we're measuring. We're measuring what costs us the money. In other words, we are trying to measure something that relates to what it costs us to provide the services for stormwater and to build drainage structures. And the basic premise is that we're using engineering design standards that are used every day to size the structures that cost you to spend the money to build the structures.
So in your opinion, Diane, what I'm hearing from you is that from an engineering standpoint, these were designed and developed to be as equitable as possible, and that if you were to begin tweaking the calculations that are used to set rate fee schedules from what you propose here and what are in a lot of the surrounding cities of Haltom City, would actually be making it less equitable.
Yes, you would take and shift costs to other class groups.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Councilmember Lanford, you...
We're getting close.
Okay.
Mention was made about requiring businesses to pave parking lots and then turn around and tax them, or having an extra fee for having to done it. Well, one of the things that sometimes I guess we probably forgot about in talking about rain, which when we get it, it's probably a gully washer. We very rarely get those nice gentle little rains that just settle the dust. But part of the reason for having parking lots is and pavement is to reduce dust from flying up in the air, and we've all seen that. It just billows up. I eat a lot of it in my backyard because we've got a dusty parking lot across the street. But that's a big deal with that southerly wind that we have here. picking up dust, and the idea of sharing the parking lots for churches. Just wanted to point out that very rarely can churches share parking lots with each other, simply because they're both there at the same time. And I think a lot of churches do, in fact, share parking lots with commercial folks if it's appropriate. I've seen that done, so wanted to address that. Want to say that the ordinance does provide for an appeal process, and we haven't talked about that, but there is an appeal process for if someone feels like that they didn't get right. And it does, I think RD mentioned people who have cisterns or who collect runoff, and they shouldn't be charged as much. The law basically provides for an exemption for that kind of activity. So we would certainly recognize that. I guess the last thing I want to say here is the issue of taking care of business and doing this for economic development. What I've heard here underlying, and I think, Tom, you've already mentioned it, is that pretty consistently everybody sees the need for drainage improvement, and this drainage utility addresses directly that need. Certainly, we could argue all day long whether or not a fee or a tax this way is just exactly the right thing. It's not perfect, but it's good, and I just think that we have an opportunity here to step out in front, which Haltom City has not always done. And you're right, Tom. This is a very aggressive fee schedule that we've talked about, and we haven't settled on it yet. But I really do think that a lot of citizens have always come to me and said, we need to get Haltom City going, and we need economic development, and this is a big step in the right direction. Thanks.
Let me add something real quick. When you were talking about the fee schedule and the aggressiveness of it, and one thing I didn't comment is that it's my hope, and as I'm sure it is everybody else up here on the dais, that the 614 doesn't stay at 614. I mean, while it's aggressive, as things get done and as things progress, this rate is brought more in line and it's reduced. Now, I'm not saying it'll go away. I mean, because there's always going to be drainage issues and maintenance issues and stuff that need to be maintained. But I don't envision this thing staying like that. As far as the utility, if this thing is created, it's got to stay in place for 5 years. Not the rates, but the utility's got to stay in place for 5 years. That's by law. And I don't know if I've explained that or if Diane addressed it or not, but I just want to make sure everybody's aware of that.
Okay, Councilmember Reese.
Thank you. This is probably for David Fain. It's regarding the time that I came up and spoke with you. And what I'm wanting you to do, because that meeting helped me tremendously, it pulled a lot of pieces together, is go over the amount of crew that we're going to need, the equipment that we're going to get, the length of time it's going to take, to where when it does, if this does get passed, we can give a time frame as to how quick we can show results.
I think you'd see results fairly quickly. Of course, I have to work with Joel, the finance director, to see what the timeline would be. But we're looking at 7 maintenance workers, about $1 million worth of equipment, which would be, bulldozers and track loaders and dump trucks. And I think you would see an immediate impact. Here again, immediate would be sometime in the spring, maybe even the early summer, depending on the weather, of course, and how we can get down in the ditches. Curb and gutter is also another thing that we've recognized in this, and you will see immediate impact with that also.
We'd be shooting to get those guys down in there as quickly as we can. The one holdup that would probably take that long is just getting the equipment. And we might even be able to do it quicker if we can lease some equipment in the meantime or whatnot. But I think it's important that the citizens see that get them in there and let's get them working.
Anything further, Councilmember Reese? Councilmember Sutton, and then Councilmember Branson.
Thank you, Mayor. I was quoted in the paper by Ellen Schroeder as saying that we need to hear from people and see what they think about it, whether we need to do it or whether we don't need to do it. And at that time that she interviewed me, I had not talked with very many people. I had some ideas in my mind about this, and I didn't want to share them at the time because I wanted to not color it with what the people of Haltom City really thought, because this is all of ours community. And this is a community deal that we have to address. It's something that we can't continue to shove under the rug like we have for so many years. I have heard from many since then. I've heard from people from a broad range of political spectrum in Haltom City. And the interesting thing about it is that things are pretty well split. So it's not really a political decision that needs to be made here. You're going to make friends and you're going to make enemies whichever way you vote on this thing. And so I think that's a good thing. I think that's a great thing, because it means that this issue has to be decided on principle. And I'm really, I know that each one of my council members do that as a habit, and I'm certainly going to do that as a habit on this vote also, that it's going to be a principled reason for why we vote for or against this. No tax is a good tax, right? That's what we've always heard. But I'm not an anarchist that would say that there's no need for taxes. I believe in government, and I believe that government has a role in our society. There's a balance to how much we need to fund government, but I believe that we cannot exist without government. So there's a fee versus a property sales. Both of them are money that is collected to serve a public need. There's two different methods here. We could do it with property taxes to fix a drainage problem. We could do it with a fee, which is what this is proposed. And there's advantages and disadvantages to both of these. All of us on the council have looked at this with a lot of study, and I'm sure many of the citizens in this city that have talked to me have looked at it too, because they wouldn't have been able to talk about it knowledgeably whenever they talked it to me otherwise. This method allows for a comprehensive plan to be realized. When you do it by taxes, you are asking the property owners and you're exempting the schools and churches. And so it's something that is not as comprehensive. It's something that the property owners shoulder. When you do a fee structure, you can do a more comprehensive plan because it has more longevity to it. Now that's a plus, but on the other side, it's a minus. Some of the things I didn't hear tonight was that, well, it's never going to go away. And I did hear that from people whenever I talked to them. And in a sense, that's a plus, because we're going to continue to address the drainage problems of this city from now on if we pass this. And a negative, yes, it's something that may not go away. Now, one of the things that the mechanisms in this ordinance, when you read it, is that we have the ability to set the fund rate at any time. This council can set the fund rate or the level of service that you see up there anytime they meet. That's a pretty powerful mechanism to make sure that we're in line with where the people feel like we can do this if we do it. I think it's a check and balance. I believe it's a good check and balance for something like this. Another thing I didn't hear was the long-term economic health that that's going to bring to this community. One of the reasons why we're having a hard time competing with neighboring cities is because we do have property that's undervalued. We do have problems with our drainage situation. We do have businesses that have a hard time dealing with the flooding issues. I think that whenever you look at everything and put it in a scale and balance, this is probably the best method, albeit not perfect, but it's the best method when you consider the whole picture of how to accomplish something in this city to begin addressing our need for long-term economic growth in the community.
Another thing I didn't hear was that the north side of town largely gets no benefit out of this. We're addressing a lot of the issues in the south part of town. I'm not saying we're not addressing any in the north, but the majority of them are in the north. I live in the north. That means I'm not going to get much benefit from this. But I believe that the southern part of this city needs to be developed better than it has been in over the past 20 years. And I think it has potential that businesses would be attracted to if we began to develop this land and began to make it usable. A comment was made that there are none of us that own businesses in Haltom City, but you know what? Every single person on this council works for a business and knows how to make them successful. There's a difference there. We know how to make a business successful. That's why a lot of us, are looking at this issue and going, is this going to make Haltom City successful? Is this something that's going to help this community be what it was meant to be? And I've got friends on both sides of this issues. They're friends, I think, but the one thing that's in common with a lot of people is they want to see Haltom City be successful in what we're doing. How we get there, we're going to be arguing about, and that's okay. That's part of the process of checks and balances in government. We need to have that discussion with that argument, that disagreement. And there are elections to take care of the inequities whenever they exist. That's a part of our government process. But based on principle, I believe, after all that's been said and heard, that this is probably the best way, albeit not perfect, to address the needs in this city at this time. I think we're going to have a tremendous discussion on what we need to do with the fee schedule coming up next council meeting. And if this passes, I highly recommend that you all be here for that. Give each one of us a call, too, and talk to us about this fee schedule if this passes. I think that would be something that we really need to look into and decide if it's the right thing. There are issues of timing of the funds, of when it'll be available. So that's about all I got to say. I really appreciate all of you coming out today, and I appreciate all that have called me and come to my house, and the ones that have expressed an interest in knowing the outcome of this. I'll definitely be calling you whenever this is over. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Sutton. Councilmember Branson.
Thank you. There's not a whole lot of questions left to ask after a couple of the other council members, but I do have one. It sounded like Mr. Sutton was given the summation there. I think I recall that this was an issue when you all went for the bond ratings for our water bonds, that they were very interested in the possibility that we might pass this fee structure.
Yes, ma'am.
Did I understand that right?
That's accurate.
So if we choose not to do this, this can impact us in ways further down the road next time we go for our bond ratings, which will also impact property taxes potentially in years to come as well.
Specifically regarding the water and sewer fund, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Lanford.
I'm sorry, one thing just came up. There was, I think, Jim made a statement that this was mostly in the south, and that's true, but I believe there is something in Group 4, the unfunded prior drainage projects. I believe one of those is the Guillen homes.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yes.
So I just wanted to there is something north of 820.
Well, just that and just regular ditch maintenance, drainage maintenance, that'll benefit up there too.
I need to ask our attorney, in all of the comments that you've heard tonight, is there anything you need to address, any clarity you need to bring to these issues? Mr. Olson?
Nothing comes to mind, Mayor. Have I missed something that
No.
I indicated I'd talk about? Otherwise, I think everything I've heard seems accurate tonight.
Okay. I just wanted to be sure to that we covered that base. I need to ask the city secretary, since discussion has gone prolonged, did I close the public hearing a moment ago?
Yes, Mayor, you did.
Okay, so the public hearing is closed, And I'm ready now for a motion regarding the pleasure of the council. And I want to remind those who are here in the audience and those who are watching that what we're doing tonight is making a decision whether or not to establish a municipal stormwater utility system. As far as funding goes, that will be something to be addressed at a later time if the council chooses tonight to approve this ordinance on first reading. I do have a comment or two I want to make, but I'll make that after we have a motion and a second. Councilmember Reese?
Thanks, Mayor. I move to approve ordinance number 0-2004-015-11.
Councilmember Holcomb?
I have a second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second, and now for discussion on the motion. I think it's important, the mayor does not vote except in case of a tie, and that's not very likely to happen tonight. I think it's important for the citizens of Haltom City to know the position of the mayor on this, and I can say without hesitation that I'm in support of the motion to establish the municipal stormwater utility system in Haltom City. I really do appreciate the comments that everyone has made tonight. I have listened to those very carefully. I had a number of phone calls today, and I appreciate that, and I expect there will be more phone calls, and I want you to feel free to do that. My personal cell phone number, area code 817-480-7835. If this motion passes tonight, we'll be talking about the specific funding level following the approval of this ordinance on second reading at the next council meeting. And I need to hear from you, and so do the other members of the council regarding this issue. The reason I'm in support of this, I believe it's essential to the future of Haltom City. I believe it's the right thing for us to do. I believe it's the right approach. It's in the best interest of Haltom City to establish this stormwater utility system that has been proposed. And we talk about community revitalization and economic development. This is a major tool for the future of Haltom City. So without any reluctance whatsoever, I stand in support of the establishment of this municipal stormwater utility system. Do we have any other discussion on the motion before I call for the vote? Okay, there being none, if you'll cast your vote, if you'll register that, I will display it at this time. And that carries, ladies and gentlemen, by unanimous vote. And I want to express my appreciation and my confidence in my colleagues here among the elected officials. I believe a very strong statement has been made about the vision that has been cast for the future of Haltom City as the result of this. Now remember, at the next council meeting, we will have the second reading on this ordinance. Following that, there will be an item on the agenda regarding the level of funding. So we do encourage you to be back at that time. Any comment you need to make regarding that? Okay. We come now to the Visitor Citizens Forum, and this is a time set aside for any person having business before the council that is not scheduled on the agenda to have an opportunity to speak to the council. We have two, right? I believe I saw Ms. Smith leave a moment ago. I believe Ruby Smith is no longer in the audience, so let me hand that back to you. We have Mr. Grazan, who wishes to speak on fire training. So, Mr. Grazan, if you will, come forward, give us your name again and address for the record, and you have 6 minutes to speak on the subject of fire training.
I'm Jim Grazan, 6208 Little Fossil. Little misreading there. I really wanted to speak about the open house we had at the fire station a week ago. And what I wanted to say basically was that it was a real neat presentation. The firemen really done an excellent job. As always, they do, but they really put themselves out just a little further this year, and I got to go around and feel some of the equipment and stuff. But what come to mind, and I realized that there's a lot of people that watch the council meetings on TV, but they don't ever come down here. And I happened to walk up, and there's a man there named Charles Langham. I know the mayor don't like me to use names, but he tolerates me. At any rate, Charles had his hands full of corny dogs and had peanut oil on them, and said, "Jim, I don't want to shake hands right now. I've got peanut oil on me." About that time, Mr. Muir walked out the door and shook hands, and I want to tell the people on TV, if they've never got to shake Charles Langham's hand, or Tom Muir, or Calvin White, that is something that they ought to make a trip down here just to do, if nothing else.
Thank you, Mr. Grazan. Our next speaker is Mr. Ray Eklund. Mr. Eklund wishes to speak on taxes versus fees in regard to the drainage. And Mr. Eklund, in view of the fact you presented this request to appear before the council without prior notification, you have 3 minutes rather than the usual 6.
Yes, sir. If you look on the right side, it says communication with the council. It's kind of hard to read. It's over on the right side, but as well. There's a little arrow pointing back over there.
Okay, I do see communication with the council, but it's late, and your writing looks kind of like mine sometimes.
Well, I understand that.
So what do you wish to address the council regarding?
Well, we talked about taxes versus fees a while ago, and with the senior tax freeze implemented in this community and many other ones across the country, the state, it's actually in Illinois as well, but this is the kind of issue. If it went to a bond and became a tax, these are infrastructure issues. A large section of our community could vote to pass the tax and not pay it. That was my complaint, and this is the first issue. A month later, here it is. People asking you to make it a tax and put it before the voters, yada yada yada. And guess what? I won't get stuck paying it. Somebody else is voting for it. So these are the kind of issues that are going to keep coming up, so y'all look out. I know that y'all are faced with rollback tax elections. Nobody mentioned that. We talk about property tax. I had a little scenario this last week. I tried to imagine if you took all these other fees and things, for example, the economic development tax, the CDC tax, the sales tax, and said we don't have those anymore, and we're going to drop everything into property tax, including this kind of thing. What would our property tax look like? And then you'd be faced with the rollback gripers every time you turn around. And I wonder, nobody would ever make the second election. Everybody get thrown out every time. So, we have to look at these things as what they are. Okay? It's a way to fund what we want, like you said, through different kinds of ways for different kinds of reasons. And I appreciate that. The curb and gutter, by the way, used to be funded. If it was curb and gutter put in front of your house, you had to pay it. The city finance director still gets a check from me every once in a while to pay for the curb and gutter in front of my property because I'm still getting billed for it. The city, right before election time, decided to let the city pay for it a few years back. So, unfortunately, I didn't benefit from that. But communications with the citizens. Councilman Sutton, I'm sure that Mrs. Sutton's a nice lady, but she does not want to have me call you when I finally get home and get down where I can call you. So, I'm asking you to please recognize those of us that operate on an oddball schedule, okay? I will try to be clear in the emails. I would appreciate, and we've heard this for months, right? An email back, okay? It's an opportunity for you. It is a benefit to both of us and much less inconvenience. You can't catch me on the phone. I won't answer it, okay? And when I finally get down where I can communicate with other people, it's really late at night. So,
Mr. Eklund, it's 2 minutes and 30 seconds.
Thank you very much for your time, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Okay, we have no one else to speak in the Visitor Citizens Forum. Do we have resignations of board members from any member of the council? Do we have appointment or reappointment? There's no attendance requirements to address. There are no items to be discussed in executive session. Therefore, this council meeting stands adjourned.